The Affair of the Vermilion Cipher, a Sherlock Holmes mystery in 2 parts. Part 1, The Gathering Storm. Dear listener, before we embark upon this most intricate of adventures, allow me to extend a word of welcome and preparation. What you are about to experience is no brief tale to be consumed in idle moments, but rather a substantial narrative, a full 3 hours in duration, comprising the first 7 chapters of one of the most complex cases ever to engage the remarkable faculties of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I would therefore entreat you, dear friend, to make yourself thoroughly comfortable. Settle into your most favoured chair, secure whatever refreshment suits your taste, be it a steaming cup of tea, a warming brandy, or perhaps merely a glass of good English water, and prepare yourself for an extended journey into the darker corners of intrigue, conspiracy, and murder. This is part 1 of our tale, and I assure you that every twist, every revelation, every moment of danger has been crafted to hold your attention from beginning to end. You need not hurry. Indeed, I would counsel against it. Let the story unfold at its natural pace. Allow the atmosphere to envelop you, and permit yourself to be transporting to that fog-shrouded London of 1895, where my friend Holmes and I pursued one of the most dangerous adversaries we ever encountered. And when you have reached the conclusion of this first part, when the initial mysteries have been unraveled but greater questions yet remain, I do hope you will favour this humble production with your approval. A simple indication of your enjoyment, a like if you will, and perhaps a subscription to ensure you do not miss the thrilling conclusion in part 2 would be most gratefully received. Do ring that bell, as the modern parlance has it, so that you shall be immediately notified when the final chapters of this extraordinary affair become available. But enough of such preliminaries. The fire is lit, the fog rolls through the streets of London, and danger awaits at every turn. Let us begin. Arthur Conan Doyle as he might have been were he here today. Chapter 1, An Unexpected Visitor. It was upon a bitterly cold evening in the early days of March, 1895, that I found myself once more in the familiar surroundings of 221B, Baker Street. The fire crackled merrily in the grate, casting dancing shadows upon the cluttered walls of our sitting room, where the accumulated evidence of my friends' many cases lay scattered about in what appeared to be chaotic disorder, but which I knew to be a system comprehensible only to Sherlock Holmes himself. Holmes sat in his favourite armchair, his long, thin fingers pressed together in an attitude of deep contemplation, his grey eyes half closed as wisps of smoke from his clay pipe curled upward toward the ceiling. For 3 days he had been thus, barely moving, scarcely eating, locked in some private mental struggle that I dared not interrupt. I had learned, through many years of friendship and professional association, that these periods of intense cerebral activity were best left undisturbed. I had returned to Baker Street some 6 months previous, following the tragic death of my dear wife, Mary. The house in Paddington had become unbearable in its emptiness, each room a monument to my loss. Holmes, with characteristic delicacy, had said nothing when I appeared one evening with my old service bag, merely nodding toward my former bedroom and remarking that Mrs. Hudson had kept it aired in anticipation of my return. It was a gesture of friendship that I shall never forget, for though Holmes was a man who professed to have little understanding of emotion, he possessed a deep and abiding loyalty to those few souls he admitted to his inner circle. "Watson," Holmes said suddenly, breaking 3 days of near silence, "you have been to your club this afternoon." I looked up from my medical journal, startled. "I have indeed." "How could you possibly? Pray do not tell me how I could possibly," Holmes interrupted with a thin smile. "The mud upon your left boot is of a peculiar reddish clay found only in St. James's, and you have carried the evening edition of the Globe in your pocket. I can see the corner protruding, which you favour only when reading in the smoking room of the Tankerville. Furthermore, there is a faint aroma of their particular blend of Turkish tobacco clinging to your jacket. Elementary. You never fail to amaze me, Holmes," I said, returning his smile. "Trifles, Watson, mere trifles. The mind must have stimulation or it stagnates. I fear these past days have offered precious little of interest. The criminal classes have been remarkably inactive, or perhaps merely more successful in their endeavors than usual. He rose from his chair with sudden energy and began pacing before the fireplace, his dressing gown flowing behind him like the wings of some great bird of prey. I require data, Watson. Without data, the greatest analytical machine in the world is reduced to mere speculation. As if in answer to his complaint, the sound of hurried footsteps upon the stairs reached our ears, followed by an urgent knocking at our door. Mrs. Hudson's voice could be heard remonstrating with someone, but the knocking continued with increased vigor. "Ah!" Holmes exclaimed, his eyes suddenly alight with interest. "Unless I am much mistaken, Watson, your wish for my engagement in some matter of interest is about to be granted. Pray observe the urgency of the knocking, short, sharp raps with no pause for response. This is someone in considerable distress. Note also that Mrs. Hudson's protestations have been ignored, suggesting either a person of considerable social standing who is unused to denial, or someone whose fear has overcome their natural deference to propriety." "Come," Holmes called out, and the door burst open to admit a most extraordinary figure. Our visitor was a man of perhaps 45 years of age, tall and powerfully built, with the bearing of a military man despite his civilian dress. His face was deeply tanned, speaking of long years spent under tropical suns, and a livid scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, giving him a somewhat fierce aspect. But it was his eyes that arrested attention. They darted about the room with the restless vigilance of a man accustomed to danger, and there was in them a haunted quality that spoke of some terrible recent experience. He was dressed in a well-tailored suit of dark blue cloth, though it was in considerable disarray. His collar was askew, his tie loosened, and his waistcoat bore what appeared to be a small tear near the second button. His hands, I noted with my medical training, showed signs of recent abrasion, and there was a slight tremor in his fingers. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes," he gasped, looking from one of us to the other. "I am he," said Holmes, gesturing to a chair. "Pray be seated, sir. This is my friend and colleague, Dr. Watson, in whose discretion you may place absolute trust. I perceive that you have come some distance in great haste, that you are recently returned from India, Bengal, I should say, and that you have within the last 3 hours received a communication that has caused you considerable alarm. Your name, I venture to suggest, is Colonel or perhaps Major Ashworth." Our visitor sank into the proffered chair, his face a mask of astonishment. "Good God, how could you know all this?" Holmes waved his hand dismissively. "The process is simplicity itself. Your bearing and the particular cut of your hair speak unmistakably of military service. The deep tan of your skin and certain peculiarities of your dress, that style of button, for instance, is particular to tailors in Calcutta, indicate recent residence in India. Bengal specifically, because there is upon your boot a trace of the distinctive red mud found in that region, quite unlike the soil of Madras or Bombay. The telegram protruding from your breast pocket, with its characteristic yellow paper and the time stamp just visible at the corner, tells me when you received your urgent news. As for your name, I confess that is the merest guess based upon your remarkable resemblance to Sir Henry Ashworth, whose portrait I observed in the Illustrated London News some months past. The caption described his brother, lately returned from service with the Bengal Lancers. Am I correct? In every particular, breathed our visitor. I am indeed Major Geoffrey Ashworth, and I have come to you because I fear my life is in the gravest danger. Holmes's expression became instantly more serious, and he took his seat opposite our guest, his hands clasped beneath his chin. Pray tell us your story, Major, and omit no detail, however trivial it may seem. Watson, perhaps you would be good enough to pour the Major a brandy. He has sustained a considerable shock. Major Ashworth accepted the glass with a grateful nod and took a deep draught before beginning his narrative. As he spoke, Holmes sat perfectly still, his eyes never leaving our client's face, absorbing every word, every gesture, every nuance of expression. "Mr. Holmes," Ashworth began, his voice steadier now, "I must first provide you with certain background information, for without it, the events of this past week will make no sense whatever. I served for 23 years in India, the last 10 of which were spent in Bengal. I rose through the ranks to achieve my majority, and was, I may say without immodesty, considered a capable and trustworthy officer. My service was not without its dangers. This scar I bear is a souvenir of an ambush by Pathan raiders in '87, but I performed my duties to the best of my abilities and earned, so I believed, the respect of my fellow officers and the men under my command. He paused to take another sip of brandy, and I observed that the tremor in his hands had begun to subside. 5 years ago, I was assigned to a particularly sensitive post. I became the custodian of certain documents pertaining to the defenses of the northwestern frontier, matters of the utmost strategic importance. The nature of these documents was such that their disclosure to any foreign power would have placed the entire British position in India in jeopardy. I took my responsibilities most seriously, Mr. Holmes. The documents were kept in a specially constructed safe in my quarters, and I alone possessed the combination. Most commendable, murmured Holmes. Pray continue. It was in the autumn of 1893 that disaster struck. I had been called away from my quarters on urgent regimental business, a report of unrest in a nearby village. When I returned some 4 hours later, I discovered that my safe had been opened and the documents stolen. There had been no forced entry, no sign of violence. The safe appeared simply to have been opened by someone who knew the combination. But that was impossible, Mr. Holmes. I had shared the combination with no one, written it down nowhere. I had committed it to memory and taken every precaution to ensure its security. Most singular, observed Holmes. I perceive that this theft had serious consequences for your career. A shadow passed over Ashworth's features. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, though I protested my innocence, though I submitted to the most rigorous investigation, the conclusion was inescapable. Either I had been criminally negligent in protecting the combination, or I had deliberately betrayed my trust. There was no evidence of the latter, thank God, or I should have faced court-martial and the firing squad. As it was, I was cashiered from the service, my reputation destroyed, my honor impugned. The bitterness in his voice was palpable, and I found myself moved by sympathy for this man whose life had been so thoroughly disrupted by circumstances apparently beyond his control. The documents, Holmes interjected, were they ever recovered? Never, sir. They vanished as completely as if they had never existed. The investigation concluded that they had been passed to agents of a foreign power, which power was never determined, and that they were presumably now in the hands of those who would use them to Britain's detriment. The strategic dispositions detailed in those documents were, of course, immediately altered, but the damage had been done. Several intelligence networks were compromised, and I have reason to believe that at least 3 of our agents lost their lives as a direct result of the theft. Holmes nodded slowly. A most grievous affair, and now, Major Ashworth, we come to the present crisis. What has occurred to bring you in such haste to my door this evening? Ashworth reached into his breast pocket and withdrew the telegram Holmes had earlier observed. This arrived at my club 3 hours ago. I had thought to begin rebuilding my life here in London, though the stigma of the affair has followed me. My brother, Sir Henry, has been kind enough to provide me with an allowance, though our relationship has been strained by the scandal. I live modestly in rooms in Kensington, and I spend my days attempting to discover what truly happened in Bengal, for I swear to you, Mr. Holmes, upon whatever honor I have remaining, that I was not responsible for the theft of those documents. He handed the telegram to Holmes, who studied it intently for several moments before passing it to me. The message was brief and chilling. The truth will out at midnight. Come alone to Limehouse Pier. Bring no police. Your reputation and your life depend upon it. A friend, most intriguing, said Holmes, returning the telegram to Ashworth. And you have no notion as to who might have sent this? None whatever. I have racked my brains attempting to think who might style themselves a friend in such circumstances. I have made no friends since my return to England. The scandal has seen to that. And yet this message suggests that someone knows something of the truth regarding the theft of those documents. Mr. Holmes, I am not a fanciful man, but I confess that I am afraid. The summons to Limehouse, one of the most dangerous quarters of London, at midnight, alone, It has all the hallmarks of a trap. And yet, if there is even the slightest chance that this mysterious correspondent can provide evidence that would clear my name, I must take that chance. Holmes rose and stood before the fire, his hands clasped behind his back, his profile sharp against the dancing flames. I perceive several interesting features of this case, Major Ashworth. Firstly, the timing. Why should this communication arrive now, nearly 2 years after your disgrace? Secondly, the location. Limehouse is indeed a dangerous quarter, but it is also the haunt of many who have dealings with the Orient, including a significant Chinese population. This may be significant given the Indian origins of your troubles. Thirdly, the wording of the telegram itself. The truth will out is a curious phrase, suggesting that some active process of revelation is underway, rather than merely the provision of information. He turned to face our client directly. Major Ashworth, I shall be frank with you. I believe that you are indeed walking into a trap, but not, perhaps, the sort of trap you imagine. Someone wishes to draw you to Limehouse for purposes of their own, and those purposes may be murderous. However, I also believe that this someone possesses information regarding the theft of those documents, and that by following this thread, we may unravel the entire mystery. Therefore, I propose that you do exactly as the telegram instructs. You will go to Limehouse Pier at midnight, but you will not go alone despite the warning. Watson and I will accompany you at a discreet distance, and we shall see what this midnight meeting reveals. I felt a familiar thrill of excitement at these words. It had been too long since Holmes and I had ventured forth together on one of his investigations, and despite the danger implicit in the situation, I welcomed the prospect of action. Mr. Holmes, Ashworth said, rising from his chair with evident emotion, I cannot express the depth of my gratitude. If you can help me clear my name, restore my honor, I shall be forever in your debt. Let us not speak of gratitude until we have achieved something worthy of it, Holmes replied. For now, I suggest that you return to your rooms and prepare yourself for this evening's adventure. Take a light dinner, and ensure that you are dressed warmly. The Thames in March is a cold and inhospitable place. We shall meet you at the entrance to Limehouse Reach at precisely 1:15 midnight. Watson and I will position ourselves so as to observe whatever transpires while remaining undetected. Should you find yourself in danger, you have only to call out, and we shall be at your side immediately. After Ashworth had departed, pressed into service by Holmes with various instructions as to his conduct that evening, my friend returned to his chair and sat in contemplative silence for some time. I knew better than to interrupt his thoughts, and I busied myself with examining my old service revolver, ensuring that it was in proper working order. If we were to venture into Limehouse at midnight, it would be well to be prepared for violence. A most singular case, Watson, Holmes said at last. There are already several points of considerable interest. Did you observe the Major's hands? I noted the abrasions, I replied. Recent injuries, I should say, sustained within the last day or two. Precisely. And the tear in his waistcoat, did you observe that it was made by a blade, not by catching upon some projection? Someone has attempted to stab our client, Watson, and quite recently. Furthermore, there was upon his left shoulder a trace of white powder, barely visible, which I believe to be plaster dust. This suggests that he has been in some building undergoing renovation or repair. These facts, combined with the sudden appearance of this mysterious telegram, paint a picture of a man who is being actively hunted. But by whom, Holmes? And to what purpose? Those are the questions, are they not? Consider the original theft of the documents. A safe opened without force, the combination known to no one but Ashworth himself. How was it accomplished? There are several possibilities. First, that Ashworth is lying, and that he did share the combination or leave it written somewhere it could be discovered. I am inclined to discount this theory. His manner was that of a truthful man, and his evident distress at the stain upon his honor seemed quite genuine. Second, that the combination was observed by someone while Ashworth was opening the safe. This would require considerable skill and opportunity. Third, that the safe was not, in fact, opened by means of the combination at all, but by some other method that left no trace. Is such a thing possible? I asked, intrigued despite myself. There are men, Watson, masters of their criminal craft, who can open any safe by means of a sensitive touch and an acute sense of hearing. But such men are rare, and their services do not come cheaply. Whoever stole those documents had both the resources to employ such an expert and the knowledge that the documents existed and were worth stealing. This suggests an organization of considerable sophistication. You mentioned Limehouse being connected to the Orient, I observed. Do you suspect some Chinese involvement in the affair? Holmes shook his head. I suspect nothing as yet, Watson. I merely note the connection as potentially significant. The Chinese criminal societies that operate in London are indeed formidable, but their interests typically lie in opium, protection, and smuggling. The theft of military documents from India seems outside their usual sphere of operations. However, they do maintain extensive networks that span from London to the Far East, and it is possible that they acted as intermediaries for some other power. He rose and began to pace once more, his nervous energy evident in every movement. No, Watson, there is something deeper here, something that connects the theft in Bengal to the events of today. The telegram speaks of the truth will out. This suggests that someone is prepared to reveal what actually occurred. But why now? And why summon Ashworth to such a dangerous location? Is it truly to impart information, or is there some more sinister purpose at work? Perhaps we shall discover the answers tonight, I suggested. Perhaps, Holmes agreed, though his tone suggested that he anticipated complications. In the meantime, I suggest we both prepare ourselves. Ensure that your revolver is loaded, Watson, and wear your darkest clothes. We may have need of both stealth and force before this night is through. Chapter 2. The Limehouse Rendezvous. The cab deposited us at the entrance to Limehouse Reach at precisely 20 minutes before midnight. A thick fog had rolled in from the Thames, reducing visibility to a matter of feet and lending the already sinister neighborhood an even more oppressive aspect. The street lamps glowed dimly through the murk like malevolent eyes, and the sound of water lapping against the pilings of the various wharves provided a constant, melancholy accompaniment to our progress. Holmes had insisted that we arrive before Ashworth, the better to secure a vantage point from which we might observe without being observed. We had both dressed entirely in black, and Holmes had added to his ensemble a dark scarf that he wound about the lower portion of his face, rendering him nearly invisible in the darkness. I carried my revolver in my coat pocket, my hand resting upon its reassuring solidity. "This way, Watson," Holmes whispered, guiding me along the waterfront. "There, that warehouse, the one with the damaged roof. It provides an excellent view of the pier while offering us concealment." We made our way carefully across the slippery cobblestones and slipped into the warehouse through a door that hung askew on its hinges. The interior was a cavern of darkness, filled with the smell of rotting wood and stagnant water. Holmes produced a small electric torch from his pocket, one of the many ingenious devices he had adopted over the years, and played its beam briefly about the space until he located a stairway leading to an upper floor. We ascended carefully, testing each step before placing our full weight upon it, for the structure was clearly in a state of advanced decay. The upper floor proved to be partially open to the elements, the roof having collapsed in several places, but it afforded an excellent view of the pier below through the gaps in the walls. "Capital," murmured Holmes, positioning himself where he could observe while remaining in shadow. "Now we wait." The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. The fog continued to thicken, and I found myself straining my eyes to penetrate its murky veil. The night sounds of Limehouse surrounded us, distant voices raised in argument or song, the occasional clatter of hooves on cobblestones, the mournful hoot of a steamer somewhere out on the river. It was a neighborhood that never truly slept, where the denizens of the night pursued their various trades and pleasures in an atmosphere of perpetual twilight. At 10 minutes before midnight, a figure emerged from the fog and made its way toward the pier. Even at a distance and in the poor visibility, I recognized the military bearing of Major Ashworth. He walked with deliberate steps, his hands visible at his sides, making no attempt at concealment. He reached the end of the pier and stood there, a solitary figure wreathed in fog, waiting. "Courage," I heard Holmes murmur appreciatively. "Whatever his past troubles, the Major has not lost his nerve." 5 minutes passed, then 10. Ashworth remained motionless, though I could see from the occasional turn of his head that he was scanning his surroundings, alert to any approach. The fog seemed to grow thicker still, until I could barely make out his figure at all. And then, so suddenly that I nearly exclaimed aloud, 2 figures materialized out of the fog on either side of Ashworth. They had approached with extraordinary stealth, and even Holmes, with his keen senses, had not detected their arrival until they were upon their quarry. The figures were dressed in dark clothing, their faces obscured by what appeared to be scarves or masks. They closed upon Ashworth with swift, purposeful movements, and I saw the gleam of something metallic in the hand of one of them. "Now, Watson," Holmes hissed, and we were both in motion, clattering down the decrepit stairway and bursting out into the fog-shrouded night. But even as we ran toward the pier, a shot rang out, its report shockingly loud in the muffled atmosphere. I heard a cry of pain, and by the time we reached the pier itself, the scene had transformed into one of chaos. Ashworth lay upon the wooden planking, clutching his shoulder, while the 2 attackers had turned to face us, their surprise evident even behind their masks. "Hold," Holmes commanded, his voice ringing with authority. "You are surrounded. Surrender at once." It was a magnificent bluff, for we were but 2 against their 2, and they were clearly desperate men. But the fog and darkness worked in our favor, creating the impression that we might have brought reinforcements. The 2 attackers hesitated, exchanging glances, and in that moment of indecision, one of them made a fatal mistake. He raised his hand, revealing a revolver, and pointed it directly at Holmes. I had no choice. My own weapon was in my hand before I fully realized what I was doing, and I fired. The man cried out and staggered backward, his weapon falling from his grasp. His companion immediately turned and fled, disappearing into the fog with astonishing speed. I fired after him, but the shot went wide, and within seconds he had vanished completely. Holmes was instantly at the side of the wounded attacker, kneeling beside him and pulling away the scarf that concealed his features. I hurried to Major Ashworth, who was struggling to sit up, his face pale with shock and pain. "Lie still, Major," I commanded, shifting into my professional capacity. "Let me examine that wound." The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder, missing the bone and major blood vessels by what seemed to be a fortunate chance. I bound the wound tightly with my handkerchief, applying pressure to stanch the bleeding. "Watson," Holmes called, his voice urgent, "I need you here." I left Ashworth propped against a piling and joined Holmes beside the wounded attacker. The man was still conscious, though my bullet had struck him in the upper chest, and his breathing was labored and irregular. Even in the dim light, I could see that his injury was serious, possibly mortal. Holmes had removed the man's mask entirely, revealing features that were unmistakably Oriental in character. High cheekbones, almond-shaped eyes, and skin of a golden hue that spoke of Far Eastern ancestry. "Can you save him?" Holmes asked me quietly. I examined the wound as best I could in the darkness and shook my head. "The bullet has likely damaged the lung. He needs immediate surgical attention if he is to have any chance at all. We must get him to a hospital at once." "Not yet," Holmes said, and there was a hardness in his voice that I had seldom heard. He leaned close to the wounded man and spoke in a language I did not recognize. It sounded vaguely similar to Chinese, but with differences that suggested it might be some dialect or related tongue. The man's eyes widened in surprise, and he replied in the same language, his voice barely above a whisper. For several minutes, Holmes conversed with the dying man, his questions apparently growing more urgent as the man's responses became weaker. Finally, the man spoke a few final words, coughed once, and was still. Holmes gently closed the man's eyes and rose to his feet. "He is gone," I stated unnecessarily, feeling the professional sadness that always accompanied death, even the death of one who had sought to harm us. "Indeed," Holmes replied, his expression grim, "but before he died, he provided some most illuminating information. Watson, this case is far more complex and dangerous than I had initially supposed." We are dealing with an organization of considerable reach and ruthlessness, and Major Ashworth is at the center of a web of intrigue that spans from India to the darker corners of London. What did he tell you? I asked. And what language was that? A dialect of Cantonese, Holmes replied. One of several Chinese languages. I have found it useful to study. As for what he revealed, that must wait. First, we must secure medical attention for Major Ashworth and report this incident to the authorities. Though I confess I am reluctant to involve the official police at this juncture, the death of this man makes it necessary. We helped Ashworth to his feet, and with him supported between us, we made our way back through the fog-shrouded streets in search of a cab. The Major was stoic in his pain, asking no questions, though I could see from his expression that he was deeply troubled by what had occurred. Fortune favored us, for we encountered a late-night hansom within a few minutes of leaving the waterfront. Holmes directed the driver to take us to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where I knew we would find competent staff even at this late hour. During the journey, Holmes maintained a thoughtful silence, his fingers drumming upon his knee in that characteristic manner that indicated his mind was racing through possibilities and probabilities. At the hospital, I saw to it that Ashworth was properly attended to. The wound, while painful, was not life-threatening, and after it was cleaned and properly dressed, the Major was made comfortable in a private room. I administered a mild sedative to ensure he would rest, and only then did Holmes and I speak privately with the senior physician on duty. The other man did not survive, Holmes informed the doctor. The body remains at Limehouse Pier. I shall notify Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard immediately, and no doubt there will be an investigation. Dr. Watson fired in defense of myself and Major Ashworth, and the shooting was entirely justified. The physician nodded gravely. I shall prepare my own report for the authorities. This is a serious business, Mr. Holmes. More serious than you imagine, Doctor, Holmes replied. But I trust that you will accord Major Ashworth every care. He is the victim in this affair, not the perpetrator. We left the hospital as the first grey light of dawn was beginning to penetrate the thinning fog. Holmes hailed another cab, and we returned to Baker Street, where Mrs. Hudson, bless her, had kept the fire burning and had prepared a pot of strong tea against our return. Now, Holmes, I said, once we were settled in our sitting room, you must tell me what that dying man revealed to you. Holmes filled his pipe and lit it before responding, the familiar ritual seeming to help him organize his thoughts. The man was a professional assassin, Watson, a member of a Chinese criminal society known as the Black Lotus. This organization has branches throughout the Orient and maintains a significant presence in the Chinese quarters of several major cities, including London, San Francisco, and Shanghai. They offer hire to anyone willing to pay their considerable fees, and they are utterly ruthless in the execution of their contracts. Good Lord, I breathed, and they were hired to kill Major Ashworth, indeed. But here is where the matter becomes truly interesting. The man told me that the contract on Ashworth's life was placed only 3 days ago, and that the telegram was sent as a lure to draw him to Limehouse, where he could be disposed of quietly and his body dropped into the Thames. However, the assassin also revealed something else, something that casts an entirely new light upon the affair of the stolen documents in Bengal. Holmes paused, and I leaned forward in anticipation. The Black Lotus were also responsible for the theft of those documents in 1893. They were hired by an English gentleman, a man of means and position, to infiltrate Ashworth's quarters and open the safe. The assassin did not know the identity of this gentleman, but he confirmed that the theft was carried out by one of their master safe crackers, a man who could open any lock by means of touch and hearing alone. Then Ashworth was telling the truth, I exclaimed. He was not responsible for the theft at all. Precisely, but consider the implications, Watson. An English gentleman of means and position hires a Chinese criminal organization to steal military documents from Bengal. Why? What possible motive could such a person have? The documents were of value only to foreign powers hostile to British interests. This suggests either treason of the most profound sort or something else entirely, something we have not yet grasped. And now this same person, or perhaps another, has hired the Black Lotus to kill Ashworth. Why, what threat does the Major pose? That, my dear Watson, is the question that must be answered if we are to unravel this mystery. But I believe the assassin's final words may provide a clue. He said, "The Vermilion Cipher will reveal all." He repeated this phrase several times as if it were of the utmost importance. "The Vermilion Cipher will reveal all." What on earth does that mean? I asked, baffled. I have no idea, Holmes admitted, but I intend to find out. This affair has aroused my interest most keenly, Watson. We have a major unjustly disgraced, a theft of military secrets, an attempted murder, and a dying man's cryptic reference to something called the Vermilion Cipher. These elements must all connect, must all form part of a coherent pattern. It is our task to perceive that pattern and act upon it before more lives are lost. He rose and went to the window, pulling back the curtain to gaze out at the awakening city. Someone fears what Ashworth might discover or reveal, Watson. Someone with resources sufficient to employ the Black Lotus, and with motives dark enough to encompass both theft and murder. This person has been operating in the shadows for years, protected by their position and their cleverness. But they have made a mistake in involving the Black Lotus, for that organization, like all criminal enterprises, has its weaknesses and its points of vulnerability. What is our next step? I inquired. Holmes turned from the window, and I saw that his eyes held that fierce light that always appeared when he was on the hunt. We must speak with Major Ashworth again once he has rested. There are details of the original theft that we must explore more thoroughly. We must also make inquiries within the Chinese community of Limehouse. The Black Lotus may be secretive, but they are not invisible. Someone will have seen something, heard something, and we must discover the meaning of this Vermilion Cipher. It could take weeks, I observed. Then we shall take weeks, Holmes replied firmly. This is no ordinary case of theft or murder, Watson. This is a matter that touches upon national security, upon the honor of a man unjustly accused, and upon the machinations of an organization that operates outside all law and morality. I shall not rest until I have brought the truth to light and seen justice done. I felt a surge of admiration for my friend. Here was the Holmes I knew best, brilliant, determined, utterly committed to the pursuit of truth. Whatever dangers lay ahead, whatever complexities we might encounter, I knew that he would not falter in his purpose. "You have my full support, Holmes," I said simply. "Whatever is required, I am at your service." He smiled, and for a moment the hard intensity of his expression softened. "My dear Watson, I have always been able to rely upon your loyalty and courage. This case promises to test both to their limits, but together I believe we shall prevail." Chapter 3. The Vermilion Trail. Morning found us, after a few hours of fitful sleep, returning to St. Bartholomew's Hospital to interview Major Ashworth. The Major was awake and, despite his injury, in reasonable spirits. The night's events had clearly been much on his mind, for he greeted us with an eagerness that spoke of many unanswered questions. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said as we entered his room, "I owe you both my life. Those men would surely have killed me had you not intervened." "Think nothing of it, Major," Holmes replied, pulling a chair close to the bedside. "But now we must speak seriously about what occurred last night and about the events in Bengal. I believe the two are intimately connected, and I have reason to think that you were not responsible for the theft of those documents." Ashworth's face transformed, hope dawning in his eyes. "You believe me innocent?" "I do more than believe, Major, I have evidence. The man who attacked you last night before he died confessed that his organization was responsible for the theft. They were hired by an English gentleman to open your safe and steal the documents. You were the victim of a sophisticated plot, not a negligent officer." Tears welled in Ashworth's eyes, and he turned his face away, overcome by emotion. "These 2 years," he said hoarsely, "these 2 years have been a living hell. To be suspected by my comrades, to see doubt in my brother's eyes, to know that my honor was questioned, it has been unbearable. If you can prove what you say, Mr. Holmes, if you can clear my name, I shall be forever in your debt." "We shall do our utmost," Holmes assured him, "but I require your assistance." I must know every detail of the theft, every circumstance surrounding it, no matter how trivial. Begin, if you will, with the day itself. What were your activities on the day the documents were stolen? Ashworth composed himself and began his narrative. It was the 14th of October, 1893. I remember the date precisely because it was the anniversary of my father's death, and I had been somewhat melancholy that morning. I rose at my usual hour, 6 o'clock, and performed my morning ablutions. At 7, I breakfasted in the officers' mess, where I conversed with Captain Thornbury and Lieutenant Morrison about routine regimental matters. At 8, I returned to my quarters to review certain correspondence. And the safe, Holmes prompted. Did you open it that morning? Yes, I needed to consult one of the documents regarding troop dispositions along the frontier. I opened the safe at approximately 8:30, removed the document I required, studied it for perhaps 20 minutes, then returned it to the safe and secured it once more. Did anyone observe you opening the safe? Ashworth frowned in concentration. My orderly, Private Simmons, was in the adjoining room, but he could not have seen the safe or observed me working the combination. The safe was positioned in an alcove away from the door. No one else was present. Continue, please. At 9 o'clock, I was summoned by Colonel Pettigrew. There had been reports of unrest in a village some 12 miles distant, rumors of a holy man preaching against British rule. The colonel ordered me to take a detachment and investigate. I assembled 20 men and departed at 9:30. We reached the village by midday, and I spent the next several hours speaking with the headman and other villagers. The reports proved to be exaggerated. The holy man was merely a wandering ascetic, quite harmless. We departed the village at 3 o'clock and arrived back at the cantonment shortly before 7 that evening. And when did you discover the theft? Immediately upon returning to my quarters. I had intended to secure certain papers in the safe before dining, and when I opened the door, I saw at once that the documents were gone. The safe had been opened, not forced, but opened as if by someone who knew the combination. I immediately reported the theft to Colonel Pettigrew, and the investigation began that very evening. Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressed together in his characteristic manner. Most interesting. Now, Major, I must ask you to think very carefully. In the days preceding the theft, did you notice anything unusual? Anyone taking a particular interest in you or your movements? Any strangers in the cantonment? Ashworth was silent for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. There was one thing, he said at last, though I attached no significance to it at the time. About a week before the theft, a Chinese merchant arrived at the cantonment. He claimed to be selling silks and other fine goods from Canton. Several of the officers made purchases from him, and he was permitted to set up his wares in the compound for 3 days. I recall that he was a cultured man, well spoken in English, and he seemed quite legitimate. Did you purchase anything from him? Holmes asked sharply. I did, actually, a rather fine silk scarf for my brother's birthday. The merchant delivered it to my quarters personally, as I was on duty when he packed up his wares to leave. He entered your quarters. Yes, but only briefly, and my orderly was present the entire time. He handed me the wrapped package, I paid him, and he departed. I thought nothing of it. Holmes rose from his chair and began to pace, his excitement barely contained. Watson, do you see it? The merchant enters Ashworth's quarters, ostensibly to deliver a purchase. During those few minutes, he would have had opportunity to observe the room, to note the position of the safe, perhaps even to plant some device or mechanism that would allow him to return later. But how could he open the safe without the combination? I objected. A master criminal, Watson, particularly one trained in the arts of the Chinese secret societies, would have many methods at his disposal. He might have secreted himself in the quarters and observed Ashworth opening the safe, using a mirror or some other device to see the combination. Or he might have employed more sophisticated techniques. There are substances that can be applied to the safe dial that retain the impression of fingers, revealing which numbers have been touched. Or consider this, what if the merchant, during his brief visit, managed to apply some substance to Ashworth's fingers, a substance that would later leave traces on the safe dial, making it possible to deduce the combination. "Good heavens," I exclaimed. "Is such a thing possible? Not only possible, Watson, but documented. I have in my files an account of a similar case in Shanghai some years ago. The criminal involved used a fine dust composed of powdered graphite and a sticky resin. Applied to the victim's hands, it would transfer to any surface touched and remain visible for several hours under the right light." Ashworth looked appalled. "You mean this merchant deliberately arranged the entire transaction simply to gain access to my quarters?" "Almost certainly. And I would wager that if we could locate this merchant now, we would find him to be a high-ranking member of the Black Lotus." "Major, can you describe this man in detail?" "He was of medium height, perhaps 5 feet 6 inches, with the typical features of a southern Chinese: smooth skin, no facial hair, dark eyes. He wore traditional Chinese dress, a long silk robe of dark blue with embroidered dragons. His hands were very fine, almost delicate, with long fingers. He spoke English with only a slight accent, and his manner was courteous, almost scholarly. His age, difficult to say. 40 perhaps, or he might have been older. It is hard to judge with Chinese features." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Did he give a name?" "He called himself Li Chen, though whether that was his true name I cannot say." "Li Chen," Holmes repeated, committing the name to memory. "Watson, make a note of that name. It may prove useful in our inquiries." I dutifully recorded the information in my notebook, along with the other details Ashworth had provided. "Now, Major," Holmes continued, "I must ask you about events more recent. In the days since your return to London, have you been attempting to investigate the theft yourself?" Ashworth hesitated, and I saw a flicker of something, guilt perhaps, or embarrassment, cross his features. "I have," he admitted. "I could not simply accept what had happened, allow my reputation to remain destroyed without making some effort to discover the truth. I made inquiries, Mr. Holmes, discreet inquiries among certain individuals who might have knowledge of such matters." "What sort of individuals?" Holmes asked, his tone neutral but his eyes keen. "Former soldiers, men who had served in India and who had connections to the intelligence services. I also made the acquaintance of a certain individual in Limehouse, a Chinese gentleman who runs a respectable importing business, but who is rumored to have connections to the less savory elements of that community. I thought he might be able to provide information about Chinese criminal organizations." "And what did you learn?" "Very little, to be truthful. Most of my former comrades wanted nothing to do with me, tainted as I am by the scandal. But the Chinese gentleman, his name is Wang Tai, was more forthcoming. He warned me that I was treading on dangerous ground, that there were forces at work that would not hesitate to kill to protect their secrets. He said that the Black Lotus was involved, though he would not say how he knew this. It was he who told me that the Lotus takes contracts from anyone who can pay their price, and that they have agents throughout London." "Did Wang Tai mention anything about a Vermilion Cipher?" Ashworth looked surprised. "Why, yes, how did you know? He said that if I wanted to discover the truth about the theft, I should seek the Vermilion Cipher. But when I pressed him for details, he became evasive and would say no more. He seemed frightened, Mr. Holmes, as if even speaking of it placed him in danger." Holmes's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Excellent, Watson. I believe we have found our next line of inquiry. We must speak with this Wang Tai. But first, Major, one more question. You mentioned that your brother, Sir Henry, has been supporting you financially. What is the nature of your relationship with him?" A shadow passed over Ashworth's face. "We were never close, even as children. Henry is 10 years my senior, and we have very different temperaments. He is a man of business and politics, while I chose the military life. When our father died, Henry inherited the estate and the title, while I received a modest legacy. I have not resented this. It is the way of primogeniture after all. But since my disgrace, our relationship has become strained. Henry believes in my innocence, I think, but the scandal has affected him as well. His political ambitions have suffered because of his association with me." "Sir Henry is in Parliament?" Holmes inquired. "He was elected to represent his constituency in Surrey 2 years ago. He had hopes of ministerial office, but with the cloud hanging over the family name, those hopes have been dashed. He has been generous in his financial support, but I sense his resentment, and I cannot blame him for it. Have you discussed your recent investigations with him? No. I thought it best not to trouble him further until I had something concrete to report. Holmes nodded and rose from his chair. Major Ashworth, you have been most helpful. I want you to remain here in the hospital for at least another day, both to recover from your injury and for your own safety. The Black Lotus will know by now that their first attempt on your life has failed, and they may well make another. Here you are safe, surrounded by staff and other patients. Watson will arrange for a private duty nurse, and I shall have a word with the hospital authorities about security. Say nothing to anyone about our conversation, and above all, do not attempt to contact Wang Tai or anyone else involved in this affair. Leave that to Watson and myself. I shall do as you say, Mr. Holmes. And thank you for believing in my innocence. As we left the hospital, Holmes was already formulating his plans. Watson, we must move quickly. The Black Lotus will be regrouping, and whoever hired them will be anxious to complete the contract. We have perhaps a day, maybe two, before they make another attempt on Ashworth's life. What is our next move? I asked. We go to Limehouse to speak with Wang Tai, but we must approach this carefully, Watson. If Wang Tai has connections to the Black Lotus, as seems likely, our inquiries may place him, and us, in considerable danger. We shall need a cover story, some pretext for seeking him out that will not immediately reveal our true purpose. What do you suggest? Holmes smiled thinly. I think a visit from a gentleman interested in importing fine Chinese goods might be in order. You, Watson, shall be a merchant recently returned from service with the Indian Army Medical Corps, seeking to establish a trade in medicinal herbs and other Oriental products. I shall be your associate and advisor. This should give us an excuse to speak with Wang Tai while observing his establishment and gauging his reactions to our presence. And if he sees through our deception, then we shall have to rely upon our wits and, if necessary, your revolver. But I do not think it will come to that. Wang Tai is a businessman first and foremost. If he has survived in Limehouse while maintaining connections to the criminal underworld, he is a man who knows when to speak and when to keep silent, when to cooperate and when to resist. We must simply ensure that cooperation appears to be in his best interest. We spent the remainder of the morning in preparation. Holmes disappeared into his bedroom and emerged transformed, his hair darkened with some preparation, his face subtly altered with the judicious application of makeup that aged him by 10 years, and his clothing changed to the sort of prosperous but conservative attire favored by successful merchants. I meanwhile prepared a portfolio of documents that would support our cover story, including letters of introduction, carefully forged by Holmes in a matter of minutes, and a list of medicinal supplies supposedly sought by various London pharmacies and hospitals. By early afternoon, we were ready. We took a cab to within a few streets of our destination, then proceeded on foot through the labyrinthine streets of Limehouse. The neighbourhood presented a stark contrast to the respectable districts of London to which I was accustomed. Here the buildings leaned against each other like drunken men, their facades grimy with decades of accumulated soot. The air was thick with the smell of fish, spices, and something sweet and cloying that I recognized with a physician's certainty as opium. The street was crowded with a mixture of races and types, Chinese laborers in their traditional garb, Lascars from the Indian merchant ships, European sailors on shore leave, and the usual collection of street vendors, beggars, and women of dubious profession that populated such quarters. We attracted some attention, two well-dressed gentlemen walking purposefully through these mean streets, but Holmes's air of confidence and my own military bearing seemed to discourage any thought of accosting us. There, Holmes said, pointing to a building at the end of a narrow lane, that is Wang Tai's establishment. The building was 3 stories tall and better maintained than its neighbors. The ground floor housed a shop whose window displayed an array of Chinese goods, silks, porcelain, jade ornaments, and other articles of Oriental manufacture. Above the door, a sign in both English and Chinese characters proclaimed, Wang Tai and Co., importers of fine oriental goods. We entered the shop, and a small bell above the door announced our arrival. The interior was dimly lit but clean and well organized. Shelves lined the walls, filled with merchandise that seemed to cover every possible category of Chinese manufacture. The air was heavy with incense, and from somewhere in the back of the establishment came the sound of voices speaking in rapid Chinese. A young Chinese man emerged from the back room, bowing slightly in greeting. "Good afternoon, gentlemen. How may I be of service? We wish to speak with Mr. Wang Tai," Holmes said in his assumed voice, slightly deeper and more authoritative than his natural tone. "We have a business proposition that may interest him." "Mr. Wang is very busy," the young man replied, his English excellent but flavored with a slight accent. "Perhaps I may help you." "I think not," Holmes said, and there was steel beneath the courtesy of his words. "Please inform Mr. Wang that Mr. Harrington and Dr. Morrison wish to speak with him regarding matters of import from the Orient. We represent certain medical establishments in London that are seeking reliable suppliers of specific substances. It will be worth his while to speak with us." The young man hesitated, clearly weighing whether to admit us or turn us away. Finally, he bowed again. "Please wait here. I shall inquire whether Mr. Wang can see you." He disappeared into the back room and we were left alone in the shop. Holmes immediately began a careful examination of the merchandise, picking up items, examining them closely, then replacing them. I knew he was not merely passing the time, but was looking for anything that might provide information about Wang Tai's business and his possible connections to the Black Lotus. After several minutes, the young man returned. "Mr. Wang will see you. Please follow me." We were led through a curtained doorway into a narrow corridor, then up a flight of stairs to the second floor. Here, the character of the building changed dramatically. The corridor was carpeted with rich oriental rugs, and the walls were decorated with scrolls bearing Chinese calligraphy. We passed several closed doors before our guide stopped at one and knocked softly. A voice from within called out in Chinese, and the young man opened the door and gestured for us to enter. The room beyond was a study that might have been transplanted entire from some merchant's house in Canton. The furniture was all of dark carved wood, and the walls were covered with silk panels depicting scenes of mountains and rivers. A large desk dominated one end of the room, and behind it sat a man who could only be Wang Tai. He was perhaps 60 years old, with a thin, ascetic face and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wore a traditional Chinese robe of dark silk, and his long, thin hands were folded on the desk before him. As we entered, he rose and bowed with old-world courtesy. "Gentlemen, please be seated," he said in perfect English, gesturing to two chairs before his desk. "I am Wang Tai. My associate tells me you have a business proposition for me." Holmes and I took our seats, and Holmes began his carefully prepared speech about our supposed interest in importing medicinal herbs and other pharmaceutical supplies from China. He spoke with conviction, displaying a knowledge of such matters that I found impressive even knowing it was a performance. Wang Tai listened attentively, asking occasional questions that showed he was indeed knowledgeable about such trade. Finally, after perhaps 10 minutes of this discussion, Holmes paused and looked directly into Wang Tai's eyes. "But I confess, Mr. Wang, that we are not here solely to discuss trade in medicinal supplies. We have been told that you are a man of discretion, a man who understands the complexities of doing business in a city like London, where many different interests intersect and sometimes conflict." Wang Tai's expression did not change, but I sensed a subtle stiffening of his posture, a wariness that had not been present before. "I am a simple merchant, Mr. Harrington. I import goods from China and sell them to those who appreciate fine oriental merchandise. I know nothing of complexities beyond that." "Come, Mr. Wang," Holmes said, dropping all pretense. "Let us speak plainly. We know that you have connections to certain elements in the Chinese community that operate outside the law. We know that you have knowledge of an organization called the Black Lotus. And we know that you recently warned Major Geoffrey Ashworth that his inquiries into certain matters were placing him in danger." The transformation in Wang Tai was remarkable. His mask of polite courtesy fell away, replaced by an expression of genuine fear. He rose from his chair and went to the door, opening it to ensure that no one was listening in the corridor, then closed and locked it. When he returned to his desk, he leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you mad to speak of such things openly? Do you have any idea what you are dealing with? Perhaps you would care to enlighten us," Holmes said calmly. "Mr. Wang, we mean you no harm. We are investigating a matter that touches upon national security and the honor of an innocent man. We know that the Black Lotus was hired to steal certain documents from Major Ashworth in India, and that they have now been contracted to kill him. We need to know who hired them, and we need to understand what is meant by the Vermilion Cipher. You mentioned this phrase to Major Ashworth. What does it mean?" Wang Tai sank back into his chair, his face troubled. For a long moment he said nothing, clearly wrestling with some internal dilemma. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with reluctance. "You do not understand what you are asking. The Black Lotus is not simply a criminal organization. It is a society with roots that go back centuries, to the days when secret societies fought against the Manchu emperors. They have codes of honor, rituals, and punishments that are beyond the understanding of Europeans. To betray their secrets means death, not just for oneself, but for one's entire family. We are not asking you to betray them," Holmes said softly. "We are asking only for information that will help us protect an innocent man and possibly prevent a great harm to this nation. Surely there is a way to provide such information without placing yourself in danger." Wang Tai laughed bitterly. "There is no way. The Lotus has eyes and ears everywhere in this quarter. They will know that you came here, that we spoke. Already I am suspect simply by virtue of having warned Major Ashworth. If I tell you what I know, I sign my own death warrant." "Then come with us," I interjected. "We can protect you, place you somewhere safe until this matter is resolved." Wang Tai shook his head. "You cannot protect me from the Lotus." "No one can. They are patient, they are thorough, and they never forget. If they decide I must die, then die I shall, whether it be tomorrow or 10 years from now." Holmes leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressed together in thought. "Mr. Wang, I believe you are an honorable man, despite your connections to the criminal underworld. I believe you helped Major Ashworth because you recognized that he was innocent of the charges against him, and that he was being made the scapegoat for someone else's crimes. I believe you are uncomfortable with the role the Black Lotus has played in this affair. Am I correct?" Wang Tai's eyes met Holmes's, and I saw in them a deep weariness. "You are correct, Mr. Harrington, if that is indeed your name. I am not a man without conscience, though I have done things of which I am not proud. The theft of those documents, the ruin of that man's career and reputation, these things trouble me. But what troubles me more is what those documents were used for." "What do you mean?" Holmes asked, his voice sharp with sudden interest. "The documents were not sold to a foreign power as everyone assumes. They were kept here in London by the man who commissioned their theft, and they are still here, hidden somewhere, waiting to be used for some purpose I do not fully understand." "How do you know this?" Holmes demanded. "Because the Lotus was hired not only to steal the documents, but to deliver them to a specific location in London. I know this because my cousin, may the ancestors forgive me, was involved in the operation. He was the one who posed as a silk merchant and gained access to Major Ashworth's quarters. He told me of the job before he carried it out, and he told me afterward that the documents had been delivered to an address in Mayfair to a gentleman of high standing. Your cousin, is he still alive?" "He is dead. He was killed 3 months ago, stabbed in an alley not far from here. The official verdict was robbery, but I know better. He was killed by the Lotus, for reasons I can only guess at. Perhaps he knew too much, perhaps he spoke too freely. Whatever the reason, he paid the price for his involvement." "Did he tell you the name of this gentleman in Mayfair?" Holmes asked urgently. "No, he was too afraid. But he did tell me one thing. He said that the gentleman had paid for the job in gold sovereigns marked with a peculiar symbol. He described it as a circle with a cross inside, and within the cross 3 small dots arranged in a triangle." Holmes's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. and I knew that this detail had significance for him, though I could not guess what it might be. "And the Vermilion Cipher?" Holmes pressed. "What is it?" Wang Tai hesitated again, then seemed to come to a decision. "I do not know exactly what it is, but I have heard it mentioned in connection with this affair. The cipher is said to be a key, a way of unlocking or understanding something of great importance. My cousin mentioned it once, saying that the gentleman had asked the Lotus to search for it, that he would pay handsomely for its recovery. But what it is, where it is, I do not know. Is it a document, an object, a code of some sort? I do not know," Wang Tai repeated, and I believed him. "I know only that it is connected to the documents that were stolen and that finding it is of paramount importance to someone." Holmes rose from his chair. "Mr. Wang, you have been most helpful, and you have my word that we shall do everything in our power to ensure that your assistance does not become known. But I must ask one more favor of you. If you hear anything more about the Vermilion Cipher, or about the gentleman in Mayfair who commissioned the theft, will you send word to me? You may address any communication to Mr. Sherlock Holmes at 221B, Baker Street." Wang Tai's eyes widened in recognition. "Sherlock Holmes, I might have known. Your disguise is excellent, Mr. Holmes, but now that I look more closely, I can see through it. You are even more famous in our community than among your own people. There are many stories told about you in the tea houses and opium dens of Limehouse. I trust they are not too unflattering," Holmes said with a slight smile. "Will you help us, Mr. Wang?" The merchant was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will send word if I learn anything more. But Mr. Holmes, I beg you to be careful. Whoever is behind this affair has resources and connections that reach into the highest levels of society. Such a man will not hesitate to destroy you if you threaten his plans." "I shall bear your warning in mind," Holmes assured him. "And now Watson and I must take our leave. We have much to do and little time in which to do it." As we descended the stairs and made our way back through the shop, I felt eyes upon us, not hostile perhaps, but watchful, assessing. The young man who had first greeted us stood behind the counter, and though his expression was neutral, I sensed an awareness in him that suggested he had been listening to our conversation, or at least knew its import. We emerged into the street, and Holmes immediately set a brisk pace, leading us through a series of turns and doubling backs that I recognized as designed to shake off any potential followers. Only when he was satisfied that we were not being observed did he slow his pace and speak. "Watson, this case grows more complex with every passing hour. We have learned much, but we have also uncovered new mysteries that demand explanation." "The mark on the gold sovereigns," I said. "You recognized it, didn't you?" "I did indeed. It is the mark of Cartwright's Bank, one of the oldest and most prestigious private banks in London. They serve only the wealthiest clients, and they are known for their absolute discretion. The mark Wang Tai described, a circle with a cross and 3 dots, is their private hallmark, used only on special issues of currency minted for their most important customers. Then we need only discover who among Cartwright's clients commissioned the theft. Would that it were so simple, Watson. Cartwright's is notorious for their protection of client confidentiality. They would never divulge such information, even if we had legal authority to demand it, which we do not, based solely on the word of a Chinese merchant with dubious connections. No, we must approach this from another angle." "What angle?" "The Vermilion Cipher. That is the key to this entire affair, Watson. Whoever stole the documents is searching for this cipher, and they are willing to pay handsomely for it. If we can discover what it is and where it might be found, we can use it as bait to draw out our quarry. But how do we find it when we don't even know what it is?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. "We begin with what we do know. The cipher is connected to the stolen documents, which dealt with frontier defenses and intelligence networks in India. It is described as a key, something that unlocks or explains something else. And it is called vermilion, which suggests either its color or perhaps its association with something red, something connected to China, for vermilion is a color of great significance in Chinese culture. We had reached a thoroughfare where cabs were available, and Holmes hailed one. As we settled into our seats, he continued his analysis. This evening, Watson, I shall consult my files. I have accumulated over the years a considerable body of information about military matters, intelligence operations, and various codes and ciphers used by different organizations. If this Vermilion Cipher is something known to the intelligence services, even if only by rumor, I may find some reference to it. Meanwhile, I want you to pay a visit to your old comrade, Colonel Hayter. He served in India for many years, and he maintains connections to the War Office. See if he has heard any mention of such a cipher, but be discreet in your inquiries. We do not yet know who we can trust, and if our mysterious gentleman in Mayfair has connections in military circles, we must be cautious about revealing our interest. I shall go to him this evening, I promised. Excellent. And tomorrow, if we have learned anything useful, we must visit Major Ashworth's brother, Sir Henry. I want to know more about the family dynamics, and I want to observe Sir Henry's reaction when we mention the stolen documents and the current attempts on his brother's life. There is something about that relationship that troubles me, Watson, some undercurrent that we have not yet fully explored. We returned to Baker Street, where Holmes immediately disappeared into his study, emerging only briefly for a light supper before returning to his research. I meanwhile dressed for an evening visit and took a cab to Colonel Hayter's comfortable home in Kensington. Hayter, an old friend from my army days, welcomed me warmly and offered me a cigar and a brandy. We spent some time in pleasant reminiscence before I carefully steered the conversation toward India and the intelligence services that operated there. Hayter, I said as casually as I could manage, you were in India during the 90s, were you not? Did you ever hear mention of something called the Vermilion Cipher? The colonel's expression changed instantly, becoming guarded. Where did you hear that name, Watson? From someone who had connections to military intelligence, I replied, deliberately vague. I gather it's something of significance. Hayter was silent for a long moment, clearly debating how much to tell me. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice low. Watson, the Vermilion Cipher is not something to be discussed lightly. It's classified information of the highest order. I'm surprised that anyone outside a very small circle within the intelligence services even knows the name. What is it? I asked, my pulse quickening. I don't know all the details. I was never cleared for that level of information. But I can tell you what I've heard through the grapevine. The Vermilion Cipher is supposedly a master key to a network of intelligence agents and informants throughout Asia. It contains the true identities, locations, and communication protocols for dozens, perhaps hundreds, of individuals who provide information to British intelligence. If such a document fell into enemy hands, the entire intelligence apparatus in that part of the world would collapse overnight. Agents would be exposed, arrested, executed. It would be a catastrophe of the first magnitude. I felt a chill run down my spine. And does this cipher actually exist? That's the question, isn't it? Some say it's merely a legend, something invented to frighten potential traitors. Others believe it exists but is held in the highest security, perhaps even in London rather than India, precisely to prevent its capture. There have been rumors over the years of various attempts to locate or steal it, but nothing confirmed. If it exists, where would it be kept? If I knew that, Watson, I'd be a far more important man than I am, Hayter said with a rueful smile. But if I had to guess, I'd say it would be in the hands of someone very senior in the intelligence services, someone with the authority and the resources to keep it safe, perhaps even someone at the Foreign Office. We talked for a while longer, but Hayter could, or would, tell me no more. As I prepared to leave, he gripped my arm and looked at me seriously. Watson, I don't know what you and Holmes are involved in, but if it touches upon the Vermilion Cipher, you're playing a very dangerous game. There are men who would kill without hesitation to protect such secrets, and others who would kill just as readily to possess them. Be careful, my friend. I promised that I would be and took my leave. The cab ride back to Baker Street seemed to take an eternity, so eager was I to share what I had learned with Holmes. I found him still in his study, surrounded by papers and files, a haze of pipe smoke hanging in the air above him. Holmes, I exclaimed as I entered, I've learned what the Vermilion Cipher is. He looked up, his eyes bright with interest. "As have I, Watson, but please tell me what Colonel Hayter revealed." I recounted my conversation, and when I finished, Holmes nodded in satisfaction. "Excellent. Your information confirms what I have discovered in my own researches. The Vermilion Cipher is indeed real, Watson, and it is indeed as significant as Hayter suggested. But there is more, much more." He rose and began to pace, his words tumbling out with increasing rapidity as his excitement grew. "The cipher was created in 1887 by Sir Charles Pemberton, then the head of Indian intelligence. It was his masterwork, a complete catalogue of every agent, every informant, every source of information in British Asia. But Pemberton was a paranoid man, Watson, and he feared that even the most secure location could be compromised. So he did something extraordinary. He divided the cipher into two parts." "Divided it? How?" "The cipher itself, the names, locations, and protocols, was encoded using a tremendously complex substitution system. Without the key to that system, the cipher is merely gibberish, meaningless symbols. The key was kept separate in a different location, and only a handful of men even knew of its existence. If either the cipher or the key were to fall into enemy hands alone, it would be useless, but together," he trailed off significantly, "together they would expose the entire intelligence network," I finished. "Holmes, the documents that were stolen from Major Ashworth, do you think they contained information about the cipher?" "I think they contained more than information, Watson. I think they contained the actual location of one of the two parts, either the cipher itself or the key. And I think whoever stole those documents has been searching for that location for the past 2 years, and has thus far been unsuccessful in finding it. That is why Ashworth is still alive, or was, until recently. Someone has decided that Ashworth himself might know more than he realizes, or that his continued existence poses some other threat. Hence the contract on his life. But Ashworth clearly knows nothing about the cipher," I objected. "No, but he might lead us to it, which is precisely what concerns our mysterious gentleman in Mayfair. Watson, we are engaged in a race against time. We must find the Vermilion Cipher, or at least one half of it, before our adversary does. If he succeeds in assembling both parts, the consequences for British intelligence could be catastrophic. Where do we even begin to search?" Holmes returned to his desk and shuffled through several documents. "I have been attempting to trace the movements of Sir Charles Pemberton after he created the cipher. He retired from service in 1889 and returned to England. He lived quietly in Sussex until his death in 1892. His papers were supposedly destroyed according to his wishes, but I suspect that certain items of particular sensitivity were removed before the general destruction occurred. By whom? That is what we must discover. But I have a theory, Watson. Pemberton was a careful man, and he would have ensured that the cipher and its key were placed in the hands of someone he trusted absolutely. I have compiled a list of individuals who were close to Pemberton, men who served under him and who would have had his confidence. He handed me a sheet of paper on which were written 5 names. Colonel James Hartley, deceased 1893. Major Edmund Blackwood, currently serving in Cairo. Captain Sir Henry Ashworth, Member of Parliament. Lieutenant Colonel Peter Forsyth, retired, residing in Bath. Captain Thomas Waverley, deceased 1891. I stared at the 3rd name on the list, my blood running cold. Holmes, you cannot possibly suspect Sir Henry Ashworth. He is the Major's own brother. I suspect everyone until the facts prove otherwise, Holmes replied evenly. Consider the circumstances, Watson. Sir Henry served under Pemberton in India. He would have been in a position to know about the cipher. He returned to England and entered politics, requiring considerable funds to support his campaigns and his lifestyle. The theft of the documents occurred shortly after he was elected to Parliament. And his relationship with his brother Geoffrey has been strained. Could it be because Geoffrey possessed information that Sir Henry needed, information he did not even realize he had? But to implicate his own brother in a theft, to stand by while Geoffrey's reputation was destroyed, surely no man could be so callous. I have seen men commit far worse crimes for far less compelling reasons, Holmes said grimly. But I do not accuse Sir Henry, not yet. I merely observed that he had opportunity, motive, and the necessary connections. We must investigate him along with the others on this list. What about the gold sovereigns with Cartwright's mark? I asked. Surely that provides a means of identifying our man. Indeed it does, but we must be subtle in our approach. Tomorrow I shall pay a visit to Cartwright's bank, not as Sherlock Holmes the detective, but as a prospective client of considerable means. While I am there, I shall attempt to learn what I can about their special currency issues and who might have access to them. Meanwhile, you shall call upon Sir Henry Ashworth on the pretext of updating him on his brother's condition. Observe him carefully, Watson. Note his reactions, his manner, his surroundings. Look for anything that might connect him to this affair. I am not certain I can maintain a pretense with a man I suspect of such villainy, I admitted. You must, Watson. We are hunting a most dangerous quarry, and we cannot afford to show our hand until we are certain of our facts. Remember, we have no proof, only suspicions and theories. If we accuse the wrong man, we alert the guilty party and lose our chance to prevent a disaster. The remainder of the evening was spent in planning our activities for the following day. Holmes coached me on what to observe and what questions to ask of Sir Henry, while he prepared his own disguise for the visit to Cartwright's bank. It was well past midnight before we retired, and I lay awake for some time, my mind churning with the implications of what we had discovered. The Vermilion Cipher was real. Someone of wealth and position was actively seeking it, willing to commit theft and murder to obtain it. And all the evidence seemed to point towards Sir Henry Ashworth, a member of Parliament and the brother of the very man whose life he had ruined and was now apparently trying to end. I finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, haunted by dreams of scarlet symbols and mysterious figures in the fog. Chapter 4, The Web Tightens. I awoke the next morning to find Holmes already up and dressed, though not in his usual attire. He had once again transformed himself, this time into a prosperous city gentleman, complete with top hat, morning coat, and an air of comfortable wealth. His face had been subtly altered with makeup to appear somewhat fuller, and he had adopted a slight limp that completely changed his gait. "Sir Reginald Pettigrew at your service," he said with a slight bow and a perfect upper-class accent. "Recently returned from successful ventures in South Africa, now seeking to establish proper banking relationships in London." "Remarkable," I said, marveling once again at his facility with disguise. "You are an entirely different person." "As I must be, Watson. Cartwrights would never speak freely with Sherlock Holmes, but they will be most accommodating to a potential client of Sir Reginald's evident means. Now you must be off to see Sir Henry. His house is in Belgrave Square, a most fashionable address. Be observant, be subtle, and above all, reveal nothing of our suspicions." After a hasty breakfast, I set out for Belgrave Square. It was a crisp, clear morning, and the streets were busy with the usual London traffic. As I walked, I rehearsed in my mind the questions I would ask and the manner in which I would present myself. Concerned friend of the family, medical attendant to the injured brother, nothing more. Sir Henry Ashworth's residence was an imposing townhouse of 4 stories, its facade freshly painted and its brass fittings gleaming in the morning sun. A liveried footman answered my knock, and upon learning my name and purpose, showed me into a well-appointed study to wait while he announced me to his master. I used the time to examine the room. The furnishings were expensive but not ostentatious, the taste of a man who valued quality over display. The walls were lined with books, and I noted that they covered a wide range of subjects, from politics and history to military affairs and Eastern philosophy. Several framed photographs adorned the mantelpiece, family groups, military scenes, and one striking image of 2 young men in uniform whom I took to be Sir Henry and his brother Geoffrey in happier times. The door opened and Sir Henry entered. He was a tall man, perhaps an inch or 2 taller than his brother, with the same military bearing but a harder edge to his features. His hair was prematurely grey at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes and mouth that spoke of worry or perhaps dissipation. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit, and he regarded me with a frank, assessing gaze that was not unfriendly but was certainly measuring. "Dr. Watson," he said, extending his hand. My brother has spoken of you. I understand you were present when he was injured. Please sit down and tell me how he fares." I took the offered seat and provided a brief medical report on Geoffrey's condition, assuring Sir Henry that the wound was not serious and that his brother would make a full recovery. Sir Henry listened intently, his expression grave. "I am relieved to hear it," he said when I had finished. "This whole affair has been most distressing. Geoffrey wrote to me yesterday, telling me of the attack and of Mr. Holmes's involvement in the case. I confess I am not certain what to make of it all. Geoffrey has been so consumed with attempting to clear his name that I fear he has placed himself in danger. Mr. Holmes believes that your brother was unjustly accused," I said carefully, watching his reaction. "He has evidence suggesting that the theft of the documents was carried out by a criminal organization hired by someone else." Sir Henry's expression did not change, but I noticed that his hands tightened slightly on the arms of his chair. "That would be welcome news indeed if it could be proven. Geoffrey's disgrace has been a heavy burden for our entire family, but surely if there were evidence of his innocence, it would have emerged during the original investigation. The evidence has only recently come to light," I explained. "Mr. Holmes has been making inquiries that have led him to believe that a Chinese criminal society called the Black Lotus was responsible for the actual theft." "The Black Lotus?" Sir Henry's tone was carefully neutral, but I thought I detected a flicker of something, recognition, concern in his eyes. "I have heard that name, I think. They are reputed to be quite dangerous." "Indeed they are. They were hired to steal the documents, and more recently they were hired to kill your brother. Mr. Holmes believes that whoever commissioned the original theft now views Geoffrey as a threat. But why? What threat could Geoffrey possibly pose? He knows nothing about the actual theft." "That is what we are attempting to determine," I said. "Sir Henry, I wonder if I might ask you some questions about your own service in India. Mr. Holmes is exploring every possible angle, and your experiences there might shed some light on the matter." "Certainly," Sir Henry said, though I sensed a new wariness in his manner. "What would you like to know? You served under Sir Charles Pemberton, did you not?" The change in Sir Henry was subtle but unmistakable. His posture stiffened and his eyes became guarded. "I did, for a brief period." "Why do you ask?" "Mr. Holmes has been researching the intelligence operations in India during that period. He believes that the documents stolen from your brother may have related to intelligence matters." "Did you have any involvement with intelligence work while you were serving?" "No," Sir Henry said flatly. "I was a line officer, nothing more. My duties were straightforward military matters. I had no connection to intelligence operations." It was a lie. I knew it as surely as if Holmes himself had been there to whisper it in my ear. The manner in which Sir Henry spoke, the way he held his body, the careful neutrality of his tone, all spoke of deception. But I gave no sign that I had detected it. "I see," I said mildly. "I apologize if my questions seem impertinent. Mr. Holmes is simply being thorough in his investigation." "Of course," Sir Henry replied, his manner relaxing slightly. "I want nothing more than to see my brother's name cleared. If there is anything I can do to assist Mr. Holmes in his inquiries, he has only to ask." We spoke for a few more minutes about neutral matters, Geoffrey's recovery, the arrangements for his care, Sir Henry's political work in Parliament. Throughout, I maintained my casual, friendly demeanor while observing everything I could about the man and his surroundings. As I was preparing to leave, my eye fell upon a small object on Sir Henry's desk, a paperweight made of jade, carved in the form of a dragon. It was a fine piece, clearly of Chinese manufacture, and I remarked upon it. "A beautiful object," I said. "Is it a souvenir from your time in India?" Sir Henry glanced at it, and for just a moment his mask slipped. I saw something in his eyes, guilt, fear, before he recovered his composure. "Yes, a trifle I picked up years ago. I have always appreciated Oriental art." As I left the house and walked back toward Baker Street, my mind was racing. Sir Henry was hiding something, of that I was certain. His denial of any connection to intelligence work was false, and his reaction to my mention of Pemberton had been telling. And that jade dragon, there was something about it that had disturbed him when I mentioned it. I found Holmes already returned from his visit to Cartwright's bank. He had shed his disguise and was pacing the sitting room with barely contained energy. "Watson," he exclaimed as I entered, "what did you learn?" I recounted my interview with Sir Henry in detail, omitting nothing. Holmes listened with intense concentration, occasionally interrupting with sharp questions about specific details of Sir Henry's reactions and manner. "Excellent work, Watson," he said when I had finished. "Your observations confirm my own suspicions. Sir Henry is indeed involved in this affair, though whether as the mastermind or merely as an accomplice remains to be determined." "What did you learn at the bank?" I asked. "A great deal, though not everything I had hoped. The special currency marked with Cartwright's seal is indeed issued only to their most valued clients, fewer than 20 individuals in all of London. The bank maintains absolute discretion about the identity of these clients, of course, but I was able to learn that one such issue was made in the autumn of 1893, shortly before the theft of the documents from Major Ashworth. The issue consisted of 100 gold sovereigns, marked with the seal Wang Tai described. Can you identify who received them? Not through official channels, no, but I have my methods, Watson. I managed to accidentally observe the bank's ledger for that period, while the manager was called away on some pretended urgent matter. The issue was made to an account held in the name of the Vermilion Society." "The Vermilion Society," I exclaimed. "Holmes, that cannot be coincidence. There are no coincidences in an affair of this magnitude, Watson. The Vermilion Society, whether it is an actual organization or merely a convenient fiction, is at the heart of this mystery. I have set inquiries in motion to learn what I can about any such society, but I suspect we shall find that it is a front, a way of obscuring the true identity of the individual or individuals behind these crimes. What is our next move? We must speak with the other men on Pemberton's list. Major Blackwood is in Cairo and thus beyond our immediate reach. Captain Waverley is dead. Colonel Hartley is also deceased. That leaves Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth in Bath. I propose that we travel there tomorrow to interview him. But tonight, Watson, we must take precautions to ensure Major Ashworth's safety. The Black Lotus will surely make another attempt on his life, and we must be prepared to thwart it. Do you think they will strike at the hospital? I think they will strike wherever they believe they can succeed. A hospital is not an ideal location for an assassination. Too many witnesses, too much activity. But if they are desperate enough, they may risk it. I have sent word to Lestrade asking him to post constables near the hospital, though I have not told him the full extent of what we know. The official police are not equipped to deal with an organization like the Black Lotus. Should we not move Ashworth to a safer location? Where would be safer, Watson? Here in Baker Street. That would merely draw the danger to our own doorstep. No, I think he is safest where he is, surrounded by hospital staff and, as of this evening, protected by police constables. But we must also set a trap, Watson. We must use Ashworth as bait to draw out our enemies. Holmes, I protested, you cannot seriously propose to use an injured man as bait. I do not propose it lightly, and I shall not do so without Ashworth's consent. But consider, Watson, the Black Lotus has been hired to kill him. They will not abandon their contract simply because their first attempt failed. They will try again and again until they succeed or until their employer calls them off. Our best chance of protecting Ashworth in the long term is to identify and apprehend those behind the plot. And to do that, we must catch them in the act. I was not entirely comfortable with this plan, but I could see the logic of it. What did you have in mind? Tomorrow evening, after we return from Bath, we shall arrange for word to be spread in certain quarters, the opium dens and gambling houses of Limehouse, where the Black Lotus has ears, that Major Ashworth is being moved from St. Bartholomew's to a private nursing home in Hampstead. We shall provide a specific time and route for this transfer. The Black Lotus will almost certainly attempt to intercept and kill him during the move. And we shall be waiting for them, I said, beginning to understand. Precisely, but the man in the ambulance will not be Major Ashworth. It will be a police officer of similar build, heavily disguised. Major Ashworth will remain safely in the hospital. We shall ambush the ambushers, Watson, and perhaps in doing so, we shall learn more about who has hired them. It is a dangerous plan. All worthwhile plans involve danger, but I believe it is our best chance. Now I suggest we take a late luncheon and then pay a visit to Major Ashworth to discuss this with him. We must have his cooperation if we are to succeed. We found Major Ashworth in good spirits, his wound healing well and his colour much improved. When Holmes outlined his plan, the Major agreed at once, despite my medical objections. Mr. Holmes, if there is a chance that your plan will lead to the capture of those responsible for my disgrace, I am willing to take any risk, Ashworth declared. I have lived under a cloud for 2 years. If I must continue to live in danger while you pursue your investigation, so be it. At least now I know that someone believes in my innocence and is working to prove it. Your courage does you credit, Major, Holmes said. But I want you to understand the risks. The Black Lotus are professional killers. If they penetrate our deception, if they somehow learn that you remain in the hospital, they will not hesitate to strike here. I understand. What would you have me do? Remain here exactly as you have been doing. Receive no visitors except Dr. Watson and myself. Trust no one, not the hospital staff, not even old friends who might call upon you. The Black Lotus are masters of disguise and infiltration, and carry this with you at all times. Holmes produced a small pistol from his coat pocket and handed it to Ashworth. It is a pocket revolver fully loaded. If anyone makes an attempt on your life, do not hesitate to use it. Shoot first and ask questions afterward. Ashworth took the weapon and checked it with the practiced efficiency of a military man. I shall not hesitate, Mr. Holmes. You have my word on that. We left the hospital as evening was falling, and Holmes insisted that we walk rather than take a cab. I want to see if we are being followed, Watson. The Black Lotus may well have set watchers on the hospital, and I want to know if they are observing us as well. We walked through the darkening streets, Holmes occasionally glancing into shop windows to observe the reflections of those behind us. After 20 minutes of this, he seemed satisfied. I believe we are clear, Watson. If there were watchers, they were too skilled for me to detect, which I doubt. Come, let us return to Baker Street. We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow. The remainder of the evening was spent in preparation for our journey to Bath. Holmes consulted his railway timetable, sent several telegrams to various contacts, and pored over his notes from the case, looking for connections and patterns that might have been missed. I cleaned and loaded my revolver, checked my medical bag, and laid out my travelling clothes for the morning. As I was preparing to retire for the night, Holmes called out to me from his study. "Watson, come and look at this." I joined him at his desk, where he had spread out several photographs and documents. These are images I have obtained of the men who served under Pemberton. Look at this one. It was taken at a regimental dinner in Calcutta in 1888. The photograph showed a group of British officers in full dress uniform, posed formally for the camera. Holmes pointed to several figures in the group. That is Pemberton in the centre. To his left, Major Edmund Blackwood. To his right, Captain Thomas Waverley, now deceased. And here, his finger moved to a young officer standing slightly apart from the others, Captain Sir Henry Ashworth. I studied the photograph carefully. Sir Henry looked much younger, his face unlined, his bearing confident. But there was something in his expression, a certain intensity that seemed familiar. "Look at his hands, Watson," Holmes directed. I looked more closely. Sir Henry's hands were clasped before him in a formal pose, and on the third finger of his right hand, barely visible in the photograph, was a ring. "Do you see it? Look at the design on that ring." I squinted at the image. The ring appeared to bear some sort of seal or crest. I cannot make it out clearly. No, but I can. I have examined this photograph under magnification. The ring bears the seal of Cartwright's Bank, a circle with a cross inside, and within the cross, 3 small dots arranged in a triangle. The same mark that appears on their special issue currency. I felt a chill run down my spine. Then Sir Henry is definitely involved. So it would appear, but there is more, Watson. Look at this other photograph taken at the same dinner. He indicated another image, this one showing a smaller group of officers in more casual conversation. Among them was Sir Henry, and standing beside him, engaged in apparently friendly discourse, was a Chinese gentleman in traditional dress. "Who is that?" I asked. "I do not know his name, but I have my suspicions. The timing is right, the location is right. Watson, I believe that Chinese gentleman may well be Lei Chen, the silk merchant who later infiltrated Major Ashworth's quarters and stole the documents. And he is shown here in friendly conversation with Sir Henry Ashworth, more than 5 years before the theft occurred. Good Lord, then Sir Henry and Lei Chen were already acquainted before the theft. It would certainly appear so. This photograph establishes a connection between them that predates the crime by many years. Watson, I believe we are close to understanding the full scope of this conspiracy. Sir Henry Ashworth, motivated by financial need and political ambition, hired the Black Lotus to steal documents from his own brother. Those documents contained information about the location of one half of the Vermilion Cipher. Sir Henry has spent the past 2 years searching for that cipher, and he has been unsuccessful. Now he has decided that his brother must die, either because Geoffrey poses some threat Sir Henry has not anticipated, or simply to tie up loose ends before he makes his final move to obtain the cipher. But why does Sir Henry want the cipher? I asked. What does he intend to do with it? That, Watson, is the question I cannot yet answer, but I suspect it has to do with his political ambitions. Imagine the power such information would convey, the ability to identify and expose British intelligence agents throughout Asia. Such knowledge could be sold for an enormous sum to Britain's enemies, or it could be used for blackmail or for any number of other nefarious purposes. A man with such information at his command would be virtually untouchable. We must stop him, Holmes. Indeed, we must. But first we must gather more evidence. The photograph is suggestive but not conclusive. We need something more, something that will prove beyond doubt Sir Henry's guilt and allow us to act against him. That is why we must interview Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth tomorrow. He may know something about Pemberton, about the cipher, about Sir Henry, that will give us the final piece of the puzzle. We retired shortly afterward, though I found sleep difficult. The case had grown far more complex than I had initially imagined, and the stakes were higher than I had dared to think. We were not merely trying to clear an innocent man's name or prevent a murder. We were attempting to prevent the compromise of Britain's entire intelligence apparatus in Asia. The weight of that responsibility lay heavy upon my mind as I finally drifted into an uneasy slumber. Chapter 5. The Bath Connection. The morning train to Bath departed Paddington Station at 8 o'clock sharp. Holmes and I secured a first-class compartment to ourselves, which allowed us to speak freely about the case during the journey. The countryside rolled past the windows, green and pleasant in the early spring sunshine, but neither of us paid it much attention. Our minds were fixed on what we might learn from Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth. I have made some inquiries about Forsyth, Holmes said, consulting his notebook. He retired from active service in 1890, shortly after Pemberton left India. He settled in Bath, where he lives on his military pension and a modest inheritance from an aunt. He is said to be a scholar of sorts, a student of Oriental languages and cultures. He lives quietly, avoids society, and spends most of his time in study. In short, Watson, he sounds like exactly the sort of man to whom Pemberton might have entrusted sensitive information. Do you think he has the cipher? I asked. I think he may know where it is, or at least where one half of it is hidden. Remember, Watson, the cipher was split into 2 parts, the coded text itself and the key to decoding it. Pemberton would have placed them in different hands, ensuring that neither could be used without the other. If Sir Henry has been searching for the cipher, it stands to reason that he already possesses one half and is desperately seeking the other. But if the documents stolen from Major Ashworth contained the location of one half, why has Sir Henry not yet found it? An excellent question. Perhaps the information in the documents was less specific than he had hoped. Perhaps it was itself encoded in some way that he has not yet been able to decipher. Or perhaps, and this is what I am beginning to suspect, Major Ashworth himself possesses some piece of information that is necessary to locate the cipher, information he does not even realize he has. What sort of information? That, Watson, is what we must determine. But consider, Major Ashworth was in charge of highly sensitive documents. He was trusted with materials that would have been seen by very few people. It is possible that among those documents was something relating to the cipher, something so obscure that even Ashworth did not recognize its significance. And perhaps Sir Henry knows this, which is why he has now decided his brother must die. Perhaps he fears that we will discover this information and use it to find the cipher before he can. The train arrived in Bath shortly before noon, and we took a cab to the address Holmes had obtained for Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth. It proved to be a small but respectable house in a quiet residential street, surrounded by a well-tended garden. The neighborhood was genteel and peaceful, far removed from the dangers and intrigues of London. Our knock was answered by an elderly woman who identified herself as Mrs. Hobbs, the housekeeper. When Holmes presented his card and explained that we wished to speak with Colonel Forsyth on a matter of some importance, she showed us into a comfortable sitting room and went to fetch her employer. The room was lined with bookshelves, and the books themselves were a fascinating collection: military histories, works on Oriental languages, ancient Chinese poetry in both the original and in translation, and treatises on cryptography and code breaking. There were also several curious objects displayed on shelves and tables: jade figurines, bronze vessels, silk scrolls covered with elegant calligraphy. "Gentlemen," a voice said from the doorway, "I am Peter Forsyth. Mrs. Hobbs tells me you wish to speak with me on an urgent matter." The man who entered was perhaps 60 years old, spare and erect, with iron-grey hair and keen blue eyes that missed nothing. His face was deeply lined, speaking of years spent in harsh climates and difficult circumstances, but his manner was alert and vigorous despite his age. He was dressed simply but well, and he moved with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced danger and survived. Holmes introduced us both and briefly explained the purpose of our visit, though he was careful to reveal only so much as was necessary. He mentioned the theft from Major Ashworth, the attempts on the Major's life, and our investigation into the affair. He did not immediately mention Pemberton or the Vermilion Cipher, choosing instead to observe Forsyth's reactions as the conversation progressed. Forsyth listened intently, his expression grave. "I remember Geoffrey Ashworth," he said when Holmes had finished. "A fine officer, thoroughly dedicated to his duty. I was shocked when I heard of the theft and his subsequent disgrace. I found it difficult to believe that he could have been negligent, much less treasonous. Your investigation suggests that my instincts were correct. You served under Sir Charles Pemberton, did you not?" Holmes asked, changing the subject abruptly. Forsyth's expression became instantly guarded. "I did. Why do you ask?" "Because we believe that the documents stolen from Major Ashworth related to intelligence matters, possibly to operations that were under Pemberton's command. We are attempting to understand what information those documents might have contained and why someone would go to such lengths to obtain them." "Mr. Holmes," Forsyth said carefully, "you are asking me about matters that are still classified even after all these years. I took an oath of secrecy regarding my work under Pemberton. I cannot violate that oath even for you." "I respect your integrity, Colonel," Holmes replied, "but I must ask you to consider the gravity of the situation. An innocent man has been disgraced and is now targeted for murder. British intelligence assets may be at risk, and there is reason to believe that someone with resources and connections, is seeking to obtain something of immense strategic value. I am referring, Colonel, to the Vermilion Cipher." The effect of Holmes's words was dramatic. Forsyth went pale, and his hand gripped the arm of his chair so tightly that his knuckles showed white. "How do you know that name?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have my sources," Holmes said calmly, "and I have reason to believe that you, Colonel Forsyth, may be one of the last men alive who knows the truth about the cipher. Sir Charles Pemberton created it, did he not? And when he left India he placed it, or part of it, in the care of someone he trusted absolutely. Was that someone you, Colonel?" Forsyth rose from his chair and walked to the window, staring out at his peaceful garden. For a long moment he said nothing, clearly wrestling with some internal conflict. Finally he spoke, his voice heavy with emotion. Sir Charles Pemberton was the finest man I ever knew. He was brilliant, dedicated, and utterly committed to the defense of British interests in India. He was also profoundly suspicious of the bureaucracy that governed our intelligence operations. He feared that the networks he had built up over decades could be compromised by incompetence, corruption, or treachery within the official channels. So he created the Vermilion Cipher, a complete record of our intelligence assets throughout Asia, encoded using the most sophisticated methods available. He turned to face us, his expression troubled. The cipher was his masterwork, Mr. Holmes, but it was also his greatest fear. He knew that if it fell into the wrong hands, the consequences would be catastrophic, so he divided it. The cipher itself, the encoded list of names, locations, and protocols, he entrusted to one person. The key to decoding it he gave to another, and he told no one, not even those two individuals, the identity of the other person who held the corresponding part. "And you, Colonel," Holmes prompted gently. "Which part did you receive?" Forsyth was silent for a moment, then sighed deeply. "I have the key, Mr. Holmes. Pemberton gave it to me shortly before he left India, with strict instructions that it was never to be used unless the most extreme circumstances required it, and never without the authorization of the highest levels of government. I have kept it safe all these years, hidden where no one would think to look for it." "Do you still have it?" Holmes asked urgently. "I do. Would you like to see it?" Without waiting for a response, Forsyth went to one of the bookshelves and removed a volume, a copy of Herodotus's Histories in Greek. He opened it to a specific page and carefully removed from a hollowed-out cavity within the book a small object wrapped in oiled silk. He unwrapped it to reveal a disc of bronze, perhaps 3 inches in diameter, and engraved with intricate symbols and characters. It looked ancient, almost like an archaeological artifact, but I could see that the engravings were crisp and clear, the work of a skilled craftsman. "This is the key," Forsyth said, holding it up to the light. "These symbols represent a complex substitution cipher, one that Pemberton himself devised based on ancient Chinese and Sanskrit texts. Without this key, the Vermilion Cipher is meaningless. With it, the entire intelligence network becomes visible." "Colonel," Holmes said with great seriousness, "I believe that someone is actively searching for this key. The theft from Major Ashworth was the first step in that search. The attempts on his life suggest that the search has become desperate. I must ask you, has anyone approached you recently, asking questions about Pemberton or about intelligence matters from that period?" Forsyth frowned. "Not recently, no, but some years ago, it must have been 1893 or thereabouts, I received a visitor here in Bath. He claimed to be a researcher writing a history of British intelligence operations in India. He asked me many questions about Pemberton and about my own service. I was careful to reveal nothing of significance, but I confess that his interest seemed somewhat excessive. At the time, I attributed it to scholarly enthusiasm. Now I wonder, can you describe this visitor? He was a gentleman in his late 30s or early 40s, well-spoken, clearly educated. He said his name was Richards, Dr. Martin Richards, and he claimed to be affiliated with Cambridge University. He was particularly interested in Pemberton's methods of securing sensitive information. His physical appearance," Holmes pressed, "tall, perhaps 6 feet or slightly more, with grey hair beginning to show at the temples. His features were regular, rather distinguished. He had the bearing of a military man despite his civilian dress. There was a scar, I recall, on his left hand, a thin white line across the back of it." Holmes and I exchanged glances. The description could fit Sir Henry Ashworth, though it could also fit many other men of similar age and background. "Did you tell him anything of substance?" Holmes asked. "Nothing. I informed him that I was bound by oath not to discuss intelligence matters, and suggested he contact the War Office through official channels. He seemed disappointed, but accepted my refusal gracefully. He left shortly afterward, and I never heard from him again." "Colonel Forsyth," Holmes said, his voice taking on an urgent tone, "I believe that your life may be in danger." If the person seeking the Vermilion Cipher discovers that you possess the key, he will not hesitate to take it by force. The same organization that attacked Major Ashworth, the Black Lotus, may well be sent to acquire the key from you. Forsyth smiled grimly. Mr. Holmes, I am not unaware of the dangers. I have lived with this responsibility for over 5 years. I have taken precautions. This house is more secure than it appears, and I am not without means to defend myself. He gestured to a drawer in his desk. I keep a loaded revolver within reach at all times, and I am still, despite my age, a capable shot. Nevertheless, Holmes insisted, I would urge you to take additional precautions. Perhaps you might consider removing yourself to London, where Watson and I could provide more direct protection, and bring the danger to your doorstep. I think not, Mr. Holmes. Besides, if whoever is searching for the key has not found me in 5 years, I doubt they will do so now. No, I shall remain here, where I have the advantage of familiar ground. Holmes was clearly not satisfied with this response, but he recognized the stubborn determination in Forsyth's manner. Very well, Colonel, but I must ask one more thing of you. The cipher itself, do you know where it is? Did Pemberton tell you who held the other half? He did not, and I never asked. That was the point, you see, complete separation, so that even under torture neither of us could betray the other. But I have my suspicions, Mr. Holmes. There were only a handful of men whom Pemberton trusted absolutely, and most of them are now dead. If I had to guess, I would say that the cipher itself was given to Colonel James Hartley, who died in 1893, or possibly to Captain Thomas Waverley, who died in 1891. Both dead, Holmes mused. Which means the cipher would have passed to their heirs or executors. Watson, we must make inquiries into the estates of both these men. The cipher must be found before it falls into the wrong hands. We spoke with Forsyth for another hour, extracting what additional details we could about Pemberton's intelligence operations and the circumstances surrounding the creation of the Vermilion Cipher. Throughout, Forsyth remained cooperative but careful, revealing only what he deemed necessary and nothing more. He was a man who had kept secrets for a very long time and who would not easily abandon his discretion, even for Sherlock Holmes. As we prepared to take our leave, Forsyth gripped Holmes's hand firmly. Mr. Holmes, find the cipher before it falls into treasonous hands. Pemberton entrusted me with the key because he believed I would guard it with my life. I have done so for 5 years, and I shall continue to do so for as long as necessary. But the cipher itself, if it still exists, must be secured. The lives of hundreds of brave men and women depend upon it. You have my word, Colonel, Holmes replied solemnly. I shall not rest until this matter is resolved. The return journey to London was spent in intense discussion. Holmes was convinced that we were close to a breakthrough, that the pieces of the puzzle were finally beginning to fit together. Consider what we know, Watson, he said, his eyes bright with intellectual excitement. Sir Henry Ashworth, motivated by financial need and political ambition, learned of the Vermilion Cipher through his service under Pemberton. He hired the Black Lotus to steal documents from his brother that contained information about the cipher's location. Those documents pointed him toward either Hartley or Waverley, both now deceased. He has spent 2 years searching for the cipher among their effects, but has been unsuccessful. Meanwhile, he knows that Forsyth possesses the key, but he cannot simply steal it without first securing the cipher, as one is useless without the other. But why has he only now decided to murder his brother? I asked. Because something has changed, Watson. Either Sir Henry has finally located the cipher and now needs only the key to complete his prize, or he fears that our investigation will lead us to the cipher before he can secure it. In either case, he has decided that his brother must die, both to eliminate a potential source of information and to tie up loose ends. A man of Sir Henry's position cannot afford to leave witnesses. What is our next move? We must investigate the estates of Hartley and Waverley. One of them received the cipher from Pemberton, and it must still exist somewhere among their effects. I shall send telegrams this evening to various contacts, seeking information about what became of their personal belongings after their deaths. Meanwhile, we must set our trap for the Black Lotus. Tomorrow evening, we shall spread the word that Major Ashworth is being transferred, and we shall see who takes the bait. We arrived back in London as darkness was falling. Holmes immediately dispatched several telegrams from the station, then we took a cab to Baker Street. As we climbed the familiar stairs to our lodgings, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. The case was reaching its climax, and I sensed that events would soon move with dramatic swiftness. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with the news that a message had arrived for Holmes in our absence. It was from Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard, written in his characteristically blunt style. "Mr. Holmes, have posted 2 constables at St. Bartholomew's as you requested. Also have news regarding your inquiries about Chinese criminal societies. Can you call at the yard tomorrow morning?" Lestrade, excellent, Holmes said, reading the note. Lestrade may have uncovered information about the Black Lotus that will prove useful. Watson, I suggest we dine early and retire. Tomorrow promises to be a most eventful day. Chapter 6, The Trap is Set. The following morning found us at Scotland Yard, seated in Inspector Lestrade's cluttered office. The little inspector was clearly pleased with himself, and he greeted us with a broad smile. "I think you'll be interested in what I've learned, Mr. Holmes," he said, producing a file from his desk. "I've been making inquiries in Limehouse as you suggested. Very dangerous business that my men had to work carefully to avoid attracting attention. But we've learned some interesting things about this Black Lotus organization." "Pray proceed," Holmes said, leaning forward with interest. "Well, sir, it seems the Black Lotus is not just one organization but a loose confederation of several Chinese secret societies, all operating under the same name. They're involved in all sorts of criminal activities, opium smuggling, protection rackets, illegal gambling, but they also hire themselves out for more specialized work, including robbery and murder. They're organized into cells, with no one member knowing more than his immediate superiors. Very difficult to infiltrate or to arrest in any numbers." "Have you identified any of their leaders?" Holmes asked. "That's just it, Mr. Holmes, we think we have. There's a man called Shen Wu, runs a tea house in Limehouse. On the surface, he's a respectable businessman, but my sources tell me he's actually one of the high-ranking members of the Lotus. Several of my informants have suggested that he's the one who arranges contracts for assassination and other specialized crimes." "Most interesting. Have you brought him in for questioning?" Lestrade shook his head. "We've no evidence against him, sir. Nothing that would stand up in court. But I thought you might want to know about him, given your interest in Chinese criminal activities. I've had him under observation for the past 2 days, and I can tell you where he'll be at any given time." Holmes smiled. "Inspector, you have done excellent work. This Shen Wu may prove to be the key to unraveling the entire affair. Now I must ask you to do something else for me, something that may seem unusual but which is vital to my investigation." He proceeded to outline his plan for the false transfer of Major Ashworth. Lestrade listened with growing alarm, shaking his head repeatedly. "Mr. Holmes, it's far too dangerous. You're proposing to use one of my constables as bait for these assassins." "I can't authorize such a thing, Inspector," Holmes said patiently. "The Black Lotus will make another attempt on Major Ashworth's life regardless of what we do. By controlling the circumstances of that attempt, we can ensure that we are prepared for it and that no innocent parties are harmed. The constable will be heavily protected, and we shall have a force in position to intervene at the first sign of trouble. This is our best chance to capture members of the Lotus and to learn who has hired them." After considerable argument, Lestrade reluctantly agreed, though he insisted on commanding the operation himself. We spent the next hour working out the details: the route the false ambulance would take, the positioning of police officers along the way, the signals that would be used to coordinate our response. "The transfer will take place at 8 o'clock this evening," Holmes concluded. "That will give us time to spread word in Limehouse and ensure that the Lotus hears of it. Inspector, you will command the main force of constables positioned along Euston Road. Watson and I will follow the ambulance at a distance in a separate carriage, prepared to intervene if necessary. With luck, We shall capture several members of the Lotus and persuade them to reveal who has hired them. As we left Scotland Yard, I could not help but feel apprehensive about the evening's planned events. We were deliberately provoking a confrontation with skilled and ruthless assassins, and despite all our precautions, there were many things that could go wrong. Holmes, however, seemed energized by the prospect. "Come, Watson," he said briskly. "We must visit Limehouse once more and ensure that the proper rumors are spread. Then we have an appointment that I believe you will find most illuminating." "What appointment?" "We are going to call upon Sir Henry Ashworth at the House of Commons. I want to observe his reaction when we tell him about the attempt on his brother's life and about our progress in the investigation. His responses may tell us much about his level of involvement and his current state of mind." We took a cab to Westminster, where the imposing Gothic buildings of Parliament loomed against the grey London sky. Holmes had sent word ahead of our visit, and we were shown into a small reception room to wait for Sir Henry. He appeared after a few minutes, looking harried and somewhat annoyed. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," he said curtly. "I have very little time. There is a vote in the Commons this afternoon that I cannot miss. What is so urgent that it could not wait? I thought you would want to know, Sir Henry, that we have made considerable progress in our investigation," Holmes said smoothly. "We have identified the organization responsible for the attack on your brother, and we expect to apprehend several of its members this very evening." Sir Henry's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but I saw what Holmes had undoubtedly noted, a flash of alarm in his eyes quickly suppressed. "That is excellent news, of course. Will Geoffrey finally be cleared of the charges against him?" "I believe so, yes, but there is more, Sir Henry. We have also learned that the theft of the documents from your brother was connected to a much larger conspiracy, one involving sensitive intelligence matters. We have reason to believe that whoever hired the Black Lotus to steal those documents is seeking something of immense value, something called the Vermilion Cipher." The effect on Sir Henry was dramatic. His face went pale and he gripped the back of a nearby chair for support. "The Vermilion Cipher," he repeated in a strained voice. I have heard that name, yes, during my service in India. But surely it is merely a legend, a myth that circulated among intelligence officers." "It is no myth, Sir Henry. It is quite real, and we have located one half of it. We expect to secure the other half shortly. When we do, we shall know the identity of everyone involved in this conspiracy, including the person who hired the Black Lotus." Sir Henry recovered his composure with visible effort. "I see. Well, that is most impressive detective work, Mr. Holmes. I trust you will keep me informed of any developments. And now, if you will excuse me, I really must return to the chamber." He departed quickly, almost fleeing from our presence, and Holmes watched him go with satisfaction. "Did you see, Watson? He knows about the cipher, and he knows that we are close to finding it. I would wager that within the hour he will attempt to contact his confederates in the Black Lotus to warn them or to accelerate their plans. This evening's trap may prove even more productive than I had hoped." We spent the afternoon in final preparations. Holmes disguised himself as a working-class man and ventured into Limehouse to spread rumors about Major Ashworth's transfer. I remained at Baker Street, checking my medical supplies and ensuring that my revolver was fully loaded and in working order. At 6 o'clock, Holmes returned, satisfied that word of the transfer had reached the appropriate ears. "The tea house where Shen Wu operates was buzzing with activity when I left," he reported. "Several men were seen departing in haste shortly after I let slip the information about the transfer. The trap is baited, Watson. Now we must see what we catch." At 7:30, we departed Baker Street in a hired carriage, driving to a position near St. Bartholomew's Hospital where we could observe without being observed. The false ambulance, actually a police wagon disguised to look like a medical conveyance, was already in position, and the constable who would play the role of Major Ashworth was being briefed on his duties by Inspector Lestrade. The evening was cold and foggy, with visibility reduced to perhaps 50 yards. It was perfect weather for our purposes, as it would allow us to follow the ambulance without being easily detected. but it also concerned me as it would provide cover for our enemies as well. At precisely 8 o'clock, the ambulance departed from the hospital, moving at a moderate pace along Euston Road toward Hampstead. Our carriage followed at a distance of perhaps 100 yards, with Holmes leaning forward intently, his eyes scanning the fog-shrouded streets for any sign of danger. For the first 10 minutes, nothing occurred. The ambulance proceeded along its planned route, and the streets were quiet, with only occasional pedestrians hurrying through the cold evening. I began to wonder if our elaborate trap had failed, if the Black Lotus had somehow seen through our deception. Then Holmes tensed. "There," he said quietly, pointing ahead. "Do you see them, Watson?" I followed his gaze and made out 3 dark figures emerging from a side street, moving with purposeful strides toward the ambulance. They were dressed in black, their faces obscured by scarves, and as they closed on their target, I saw the gleam of weapons in their hands. "Driver, faster," Holmes commanded. "We must intervene before they reach the ambulance." Our carriage lurched forward, but even as we accelerated, the 3 figures reached the ambulance. One of them leaped onto the driver's seat, grappling with the constable who was playing the role of the driver. Another wrenched open the rear door, clearly intent on attacking the supposed patient within. That was when Lestrade's men revealed themselves. Constables emerged from doorways and alleys on both sides of the street, their whistles shrilling in the fog. "Police, surrender at once." The 3 attackers immediately abandoned their assault and scattered, running in different directions with remarkable speed. 2 of them disappeared into the fog before the constables could close on them, but the third, the one who had been attempting to open the ambulance door, found his escape blocked by a constable who emerged directly in his path. What followed happened with shocking swiftness. The attacker drew a knife and slashed at the constable, who fell back with a cry of pain. Before the wounded man could recover, the attacker was running again, heading directly toward our carriage. "Stop him, Watson," Holmes cried, leaping from the carriage even before it had fully halted. I drew my revolver and jumped down, placing myself in the attacker's path. "Halt," I commanded, leveling the weapon at him. The man did not hesitate. He changed directions slightly and came at me with his knife raised. I had no choice. I fired, aiming for his shoulder in hopes of disabling rather than killing him. The shot took him in the upper chest, and he stumbled but did not fall. With a desperate lunge, he slashed at me with the knife, the blade passing within inches of my throat. Holmes was on him in an instant, tackling him to the ground. The 2 struggled briefly, but the man's injury had weakened him, and Holmes, with his knowledge of Baritsu, quickly subdued him. Other constables arrived moments later and secured the prisoner. "Well done, Watson," Holmes gasped, rising to his feet. "Though I wish you had not been forced to shoot him. We need him alive to answer questions." I knelt beside the wounded man and examined his injury. "The bullet passed through the upper lung," I reported. "He needs immediate medical attention, but he should survive if we act quickly." The man was carried back to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where I supervised his treatment. He was unconscious by the time we arrived, having lost considerable blood, and it was several hours before he was stable enough to be questioned. During that time, Holmes paced the hospital corridors like a caged tiger, frustrated by the delay but recognizing its necessity. Finally, shortly before midnight, the man regained consciousness. Lestrade and Holmes were immediately at his bedside, with me standing by to ensure that the questioning did not further endanger my patient. The man's eyes opened, focusing slowly on Holmes. He was young, perhaps 25, with the typical features of a southern Chinese. Despite his pain and weakness, there was a hardness in his expression that spoke of a life lived outside the law. "What is your name?" Holmes asked in Cantonese. The man remained silent, his jaw set stubbornly. "You are going to die," Holmes said bluntly, though this was not medically accurate. "Before you do, you have a choice. You can die with honor, knowing that you have protected your Confederates, or you can die knowing that you have betrayed your oath to the Black Lotus. Which shall it be?" The man's eyes widened slightly at the mention of the Black Lotus, but still he said nothing. "I know about Shen Wu," Holmes continued. "I know that he arranged this contract, that he hired you and your companions to kill Major Ashworth. What I do not know is who hired Shen Wu, Who is paying for this assassination? Give me a name and I shall ensure that when you die," he paused meaningfully, "your family in China receives compensation for your loss." It was a calculated gamble, an appeal to the man's sense of family obligation combined with the false suggestion that his death was inevitable. For a long moment I thought it had failed. Then the man spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do not know the name. We are never told the name of the client, but I can tell you this. He is an English gentleman, a man of high position. He has paid Shen Wu many times over the years for various services. This is not the first contract he has given us." "Describe him," Holmes commanded. "I have never seen him. Only Shen Wu meets with him. But Shen Wu has said that he is a man who wears the mask of respectability while his soul is stained with evil. He is a man who will stop at nothing to achieve his ambitions. Where can I find Shen Wu? He will not be at the tea house. By now he will know that I have been captured. He will have fled to the safe house, the place where we go when the police grow too close." "Where is this safe house?" The man hesitated and Holmes leaned closer. "Your life for this information. Tell me where Shen Wu has gone, and I shall see to it that Dr. Watson here does everything in his power to save your life. Refuse, and I shall walk away and let you die from your wounds." It was a bluff. I would never abandon a patient, and Holmes knew it, but the wounded man did not know this. After a moment of internal struggle, he spoke again. "The safe house is in Shadwell near the docks, number 17 Nightingale Court. It is a warehouse that appears abandoned, but the upper floors are used by the Lotus. Shen Wu will be there destroying records, preparing to flee London. How many men will be with him? Perhaps 6 or 8, all of them skilled fighters, all of them loyal to the death." Holmes nodded and rose from the bedside. "Inspector Lestrade, we must act immediately. Shen Wu must not be allowed to escape." "Mr. Holmes," I objected, "you cannot mean to assault a warehouse filled with armed criminals tonight. You must wait for daylight for reinforcements. There is no time, Watson. By morning Shen Wu will be gone, and with him any chance of proving Sir Henry Ashworth's guilt. No, we must strike now, while we still have the advantage of surprise." Lestrade looked dubious but nodded. "I can have a dozen constables assembled within the hour. We'll surround the warehouse and force them to surrender." "Make it 24," Holmes said. "These are dangerous men, Inspector, and they will not surrender easily. But we must take Shen Wu alive. He is the link between the Black Lotus and whoever hired them. Without his testimony, we cannot prove the case against Sir Henry." The next hour was spent in frantic preparation. Constables were summoned from their beats, armed with truncheons and whistles. A police wagon was ready to transport prisoners, and Holmes, Lestrade, and I planned our assault on the warehouse in Shadwell. As for me, I checked my revolver once more and steeled myself for what promised to be a dangerous confrontation. We were about to beard the Black Lotus in their den, and I had no illusions about the violence that might result. But there was no alternative. We had come too far, learned too much to turn back now. The truth about the Vermilion Cipher was within our grasp, and with it, the evidence needed to bring Sir Henry Ashworth to justice. The game, as Holmes would have said, was afoot, and before the sun rose on another day, I knew that it would be played to its final, dramatic conclusion. Chapter 7, The Shadwell Raid. Nightingale Court proved to be a narrow alley in one of the most disreputable sections of Shadwell, a warren of decrepit warehouses and tenements that housed the poorest of London's East End residents. The warehouse at number 17 was a 3-story brick structure that appeared, as our prisoner had indicated, to be abandoned. Its windows were dark, and there was no sign of activity within. Holmes, Lestrade, and I stood in the shadow of a nearby building, watching the warehouse while the constables took up their positions around it. It was now past 1 o'clock in the morning, and the streets were largely deserted save for the occasional drunk staggering home from a pub. "We must assume they are on alert," Holmes whispered. "They will have watchers posted, and they will be prepared for an assault. Inspector, have your men ready to force the doors on my signal. Watson and I will attempt to gain entry through the rear of the building while you attack from the front. The distraction should allow us to reach the upper floors before they can mount an organized defense." "Mr. Holmes, I must protest. Lestrade began, but Holmes cut him off. "There is no time for debate, Inspector. Shen Wu is a clever man. If we give him any opportunity to escape, he will take it. We must strike hard and fast." Lestrade reluctantly agreed, and Holmes and I made our way through the shadows to the rear of the warehouse. We found a door that was locked but not bolted, and Holmes made short work of it with his lock picks. We slipped inside, finding ourselves in what had once been a loading area, now filled with broken crates and debris. The interior of the warehouse was pitch dark and silent. Holmes produced his electric torch and played its beam briefly around the space, revealing a stairway leading upward. We climbed carefully, testing each step before putting our full weight upon it, for any sound might alert those above to our presence. We had reached the second-floor landing when all hell broke loose below. The sound of wood splintering and whistles shrilling filled the air as Lestrade and his men forced the front entrance. Shouts erupted from the floor above us, and we heard the sound of running feet. "Now, Watson," Holmes hissed, and we sprinted up the final flight of stairs. We emerged into a large room that had been converted into living quarters for the Black Lotus. Several men were there, some leaping up from their beds, others already armed and moving toward the stairs down which Lestrade's constables would soon be coming. The sight of Holmes and myself emerging from the rear stairway clearly took them by surprise. One of them shouted something in Chinese and drew a revolver. I fired first, my shot taking him in the shoulder. He fell back with a cry, his weapon clattering to the floor. The other men scattered, some fleeing toward windows, others turning to fight. What followed was a confused melee that I can barely recall in its particulars. Holmes grappled with one attacker, using his skills at Baritsu to throw the man heavily to the floor. I found myself facing two more, both armed with knives, and I was forced to use my revolver as a club, striking one across the temple while driving my boot into the knee of the other. Constables were now pouring up the stairs, their superior numbers quickly overwhelming the defenders. Within minutes, the room was secured, and the members of the Black Lotus who had not escaped through the windows were in custody. But Shen Wu was not among them. He must be on the upper floor, Holmes panted, already moving toward another stairway at the far end of the room. "Watson, with me." We climbed to the third floor and found a single large room that had clearly served as Shen Wu's private quarters and office. It was better furnished than the floor below, with a proper bed, a desk covered with papers and several chests that likely contained valuables. But the room was empty and a window stood open, letting in the cold night air. Holmes rushed to the window and looked out. "There," he cried, pointing downward. "He's on the fire escape. Watson, we must follow." I looked out and saw a figure descending the metal ladder with remarkable agility. Holmes was already climbing through the window, and I followed, though with considerably less enthusiasm. The fire escape was old and rickety, swaying alarmingly under our weight, and the ground was a long way below. We descended as quickly as we dared, but Shen Wu had a head start, and by the time we reached the ground, he had disappeared into the maze of alleys that surrounded the warehouse. Holmes immediately set off in pursuit, and I followed, my lungs burning with exertion. We ran through narrow passages between buildings, vaulted over piles of refuse, and splashed through puddles of foul-smelling water. Several times we lost sight of our quarry, only to catch a glimpse of him as he rounded a corner ahead of us. Finally, we emerged onto a broader street near the docks, and there we saw him, a slight figure running toward the waterfront with desperate speed. Holmes put on a burst of speed that I could not match, and he began to close the distance. Shen Wu reached the edge of a wharf and looked back, seeing Holmes bearing down on him. For a moment, I thought he would dive into the Thames, but instead, he drew a revolver from his coat and took aim at Holmes. "Holmes, look out!" I shouted, bringing up my own weapon. The two shots came almost simultaneously, Shen Wu's and mine. Holmes threw himself flat on the wharf and Shen Wu staggered, my bullet having struck him in the leg. He tried to raise his weapon again, but his strength failed him and he collapsed to the ground. By the time I reached them, Holmes was on his feet and standing over the wounded man. Shen Wu was conscious but in considerable pain, clutching his injured leg and cursing in Chinese. "Well shot, Watson," Holmes said, breathing heavily. Though I would have preferred him unwounded, we need him able to speak. I knelt beside Shen Wu and examined his injury. The bullet has shattered his fibula, I reported. He needs medical attention immediately, but the wound is not life-threatening. Then let us return him to St. Bartholomew's with his compatriot, Holmes said. Between the two of them, I believe we shall extract the truth about who hired the Black Lotus to steal those documents and murder Major Ashworth. Lestrade and several constables arrived moments later, having followed the sounds of gunfire. Shen Wu was placed on a stretcher and carried back to the police wagon, with me walking alongside to ensure he did not lose consciousness before we could question him. The sky was beginning to lighten in the east by the time we returned to St. Bartholomew's Hospital. The previous prisoner, whose name we learned was Chen Zhao, was still under guard in his room, his condition stable. Shen Wu was taken to a different room and his wound attended to, though I insisted that he be restrained to prevent any attempt at escape or self-harm. Holmes, Lestrade, and I gathered in a small private office to discuss how best to proceed with the interrogation. We were all exhausted, our clothes torn and filthy from the night's activities, but Holmes's eyes burned with determination. Shen Wu is the key to everything, he said, accepting a cup of strong tea from a nurse. He can identify the gentleman in Mayfair who hired the Black Lotus. With his testimony, we can build a case against Sir Henry Ashworth that even the most skeptical jury would have to accept. But will he talk? Lestrade asked doubtfully. These Chinese criminals are notoriously close-mouthed. They'd rather die than betray their organization. Shen Wu is different, Holmes replied. He is a businessman first and a criminal second. His loyalty is to himself and his own survival, not to some abstract code of honor. We simply need to present him with the right incentives or the right threats. We allowed Shen Wu several hours to recover from his injury before approaching him. When we finally entered his room, we found him awake and alert, his eyes watching us with a mixture of fear and calculation. Holmes pulled up a chair beside the bed and addressed Shen Wu in Cantonese. What followed was a lengthy conversation that I could not fully follow, though I could tell from Holmes's tone that he was alternating between threats and promises. Several times, Shen Wu shook his head vehemently, clearly refusing to cooperate. But Holmes was patient and persistent, and gradually I saw the resistance beginning to crumble. Finally, after perhaps an hour of this verbal fencing, Shen Wu nodded once, a gesture of defeat. Holmes smiled in satisfaction and continued the conversation for a few more minutes before turning to Lestrade and myself. He will cooperate, Holmes announced. In exchange for his testimony, he asks for leniency, deportation rather than hanging. I have indicated that such an arrangement might be possible, though of course that decision lies with the courts and with you, Inspector. What has he told you? Lestrade demanded eagerly. Everything we need to know, Holmes replied. The gentleman who hired the Black Lotus is indeed Sir Henry Ashworth, Member of Parliament. Shen Wu has been working for him for nearly 6 years, carrying out various illegal activities on his behalf. The theft of the documents from Major Ashworth in 1893 was the largest and most complex operation, but there have been others, break-ins at the homes of Sir Henry's political rivals, the theft of sensitive correspondence, and at least 2 other attempts at murder that were not carried out because the targets proved too difficult to reach. Good God, I breathed. The man is a monster. He is a man consumed by ambition, Holmes corrected. Shen Wu tells me that Sir Henry became obsessed with the Vermilion Cipher years ago when he first learned of its existence while serving under Pemberton. He recognized its potential value, not just the financial windfall from selling it to a foreign power, but the political power it would give him. Imagine, Watson, a member of Parliament with the ability to expose or protect British intelligence agents throughout Asia at will. He could manipulate policy, influence appointments, even blackmail officials in the Foreign Office. He would be virtually untouchable. But surely someone would have noticed his activities, I objected. Would they? Sir Henry has been very careful, very patient. He has used the Black Lotus for his dirty work, ensuring that nothing could be traced back to him directly. He paid them in gold sovereigns from his private account at Cartwright's bank, and he always met with Shen Wu in locations where they would not be observed. Even now we have no physical evidence linking him to these crimes, only Shen Wu's testimony, which may not be enough to convict him, Lestrade said grimly. The word of a Chinese criminal against a member of parliament. No jury would accept it, which is why we must find the Vermilion Cipher itself, Holmes said. If we can prove that Sir Henry possesses either the cipher or the key, and if we can connect it to the stolen documents, then we have him. The cipher is the physical evidence we need to corroborate Shen Wu's testimony. Do you know where it is? I asked. Shen Wu tells me that Sir Henry finally located it 3 weeks ago. It was among the effects of Colonel James Hartley, who died in 1893. Hartley's widow moved to Surrey after her husband's death, and she recently passed away herself. When her estate was being settled, certain items were offered for sale, including a collection of her late husband's books and papers. Sir Henry, who had been watching for any such opportunity, purchased the entire collection. Hidden within it, disguised as an old manuscript on Chinese poetry, was the Vermilion Cipher itself. Then he has it, I exclaimed. Holmes, we must act immediately. Indeed we must, but we face a challenge, Watson. Sir Henry keeps the cipher at his country house in Surrey, not at his London residence. And that house is well staffed with servants and protected by substantial grounds. We cannot simply march in and demand to search the premises. We need either a warrant, which would require us to reveal our evidence to a magistrate who might be sympathetic to Sir Henry, or we need some other means of gaining access to the house and locating the cipher. What about Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth? I suggested. He has the key. Surely if Sir Henry has the cipher, he will eventually need to approach Forsyth to obtain the key. We could set a watch on Forsyth and catch Sir Henry in the act. Holmes shook his head. Sir Henry knows that Forsyth would never willingly surrender the key. No, Watson, I believe his plan is more sinister. He intends to have the Black Lotus steal the key from Forsyth, or perhaps even murder him and take it from his body. With both the cipher and the key in his possession, Sir Henry would have achieved his goal. The Vermilion Cipher would be his, and with it, the power to manipulate or destroy British intelligence operations throughout Asia. Then we must warn Forsyth, I said urgently. I have already sent him a telegram, Holmes replied, but I fear it may not be enough. Sir Henry is a desperate man now, Watson. He knows that we are closing in on him. He will act quickly before we can marshal the evidence against him. I would not be surprised if he has already sent men to Bath to deal with Forsyth. Lestrade had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. Mr. Holmes, if what you say is true, we are dealing with a conspiracy that reaches to the highest levels of government. We need to involve the Home Office, perhaps even the Prime Minister himself. Not yet, Holmes said firmly. The moment we involve the official channels, word will reach Sir Henry. He has friends in high places, Inspector, friends who would warn him of any investigation. No, we must act on our own authority, quickly and decisively. We must go to Surrey tonight and search Sir Henry's house. If we can find the cipher and seize it as evidence, then we can bring in the authorities, but not before. That's breaking and entering, Mr. Holmes, Lestrade protested. I can't authorize such a thing. Then don't authorize it, Holmes replied coolly. Watson and I will go alone. You may remain here in London with a clear conscience. But if we are successful, Inspector, you will receive full credit for solving the case. And if we fail, well, then you can truthfully say you knew nothing of our illegal activities. Lestrade wrestled with his conscience for several moments, then sighed heavily. Very well, Mr. Holmes, but I'm going with you. If you're going to break the law in pursuit of justice, then I'd rather be there to keep you out of too much trouble. Besides, if you do find evidence, I want to see it with my own eyes before we bring charges against a sitting member of Parliament. Holmes smiled. I would not have it any other way, Inspector. Now let us make our preparations. We shall depart for Surrey at nightfall. Watson, I suggest you get some rest. We have had no sleep for more than 24 hours, and we shall need all our faculties for tonight's work. Inspector, please arrange for additional guards to be placed on Major Ashworth and on our 2 prisoners here. I would not put it past Sir Henry to attempt to silence them if he learns of their capture. The day was spent in preparation and fitful rest. I managed to sleep for a few hours, though my dreams were troubled by images of dark warehouses and desperate pursuits through fog-shrouded streets. When I awoke in the late afternoon, I found Holmes had been busy. He had obtained detailed plans of Sir Henry's country house from the county records office, and he had made inquiries about the household staff and their routines. "The house is called Ashworth Grange," he explained, showing me a drawing. "It is a substantial property with some 20 rooms set in about 30 acres of parkland. Sir Henry employs a staff of 6, a butler, a housekeeper, 2 maids, a cook, and a groom. The groom lives in quarters above the stables, while the other servants have rooms in the house itself. Sir Henry is not currently in residence. He has remained in London for parliamentary business, but the staff maintain the house in his absence." "How do we gain entry?" I asked. "Through a window on the ground floor here." Holmes indicated a point on the plan. "It is a library window that is poorly secured. I learned this from the groom's nephew, who works at a pub in the village and whom I encountered this afternoon. Once inside, we must search for the cipher. Shenwu tells me that Sir Henry would keep it somewhere secure but accessible, probably in his private study on the first floor. We must be quick and silent, Watson. If we are discovered by the servants, our entire plan collapses." At 6 o'clock, Lestrade joined us at Baker Street, and the 3 of us departed in a hired carriage for the journey to Surrey. It was a drive of some 2 hours, and we arrived at the village near Ashworth Grange just as full darkness was falling. We left the carriage at a small inn, with instructions to the driver to wait for our return, and proceeded on foot across the fields towards Sir Henry's estate. The house loomed before us in the darkness, a square Georgian structure with tall windows that glowed warmly with lamplight. We approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows of the trees that bordered the property. As we drew closer, we could see figures moving within the house, the servants going about their evening duties. "We must wait until the household retires," Holmes whispered. "The servants will likely go to bed by 10 o'clock. We shall enter at 11, when all should be quiet." We settled ourselves in a small copse of trees where we could observe the house while remaining hidden. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. One by one, the lights in the windows were extinguished, until only a single lamp remained burning in what appeared to be the entrance hall. At precisely 11 o'clock, Holmes rose. "Now," he whispered, "follow me and make no sound." We crept across the lawn toward the house, moving from shadow to shadow. The library window that Holmes had identified was indeed poorly secured, and he had it open within moments. We climbed through one by one and found ourselves in a large room lined with bookshelves and furnished with comfortable reading chairs. Holmes produced his electric torch and played its beam briefly around the room, then led us to the door. We emerged into a corridor and made our way to the staircase, climbing silently to the first floor. At the top of the stairs, Holmes paused, consulting his mental map of the house, then pointed down a corridor to the right. Sir Henry's study was the 3rd door along the corridor. Holmes tried the handle and found it locked, but once again his lock picks made short work of the obstacle. We slipped inside and closed the door behind us. The study was a masculine room, furnished with a large desk, leather chairs, and walls covered with hunting trophies and framed photographs. Holmes immediately went to the desk and began searching through its drawers, while Lestrade and I examined the bookshelves and cabinets that lined the walls. Here, Holmes whispered urgently after several minutes, "Watson, Lestrade, come and see this." We gathered around the desk, where Holmes had opened a locked drawer and removed its contents. Among them was a leather-bound volume that appeared to be very old, its pages yellowed with age. Holmes opened it carefully, and I saw that it was covered with dense columns of symbols, not Chinese characters, not Sanskrit, but something else entirely, a complex code that meant nothing to me. "The Vermilion Cipher," Holmes breathed. "This is it, Watson. This is what Sir Henry has been seeking all these years. But without the key, it's meaningless," Lestrade observed. "Precisely. Which is why Sir Henry will be making a move to obtain the key very soon if he has not already done so. We must. Holmes broke off suddenly, his head turning toward the door. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. I listened intently and heard it, the sound of footsteps in the corridor outside, moving toward the study. Holmes quickly closed the cipher and thrust it inside his coat, then extinguished his torch. We stood in darkness, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps stopped outside the door. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a key turning in a lock. The door swung open and a figure entered carrying a candle. In the flickering light, I recognized Sir Henry Ashworth. He was not alone. Behind him came two other men, both large and rough-looking, clearly hired muscle of some sort. Sir Henry walked to his desk, apparently intending to retrieve something from the locked drawer, and it was only when he found the drawer already open that he realized something was amiss. "Who's there?" he demanded, setting down his candle and reaching into his coat. "Show yourself." Holmes stepped forward into the light. "Good evening, Sir Henry. I believe you were expecting someone else." Sir Henry's face went white, then red with fury. "Holmes, what are you doing in my house? This is breaking and entering. I'll have you arrested." "I think not," Holmes replied calmly. "You see, I have here something that belongs to Her Majesty's government, not to you. The Vermilion Cipher was stolen from its rightful custodian, and I am now returning it to proper authority." He patted his coat where the cipher was concealed. "You have no proof that I stole anything," Sir Henry snarled. "You're the one who's broken into my home and taken my property." "Your property? How interesting that you claim ownership of a document that officially does not exist. But let us not bandy words, Sir Henry. I know everything. I know that you hired the Black Lotus to steal documents from your brother in 1893. I know that you used those documents to locate the Vermilion Cipher. I know that you have been planning to steal the key from Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth, and I know that you have hired assassins to murder your own brother to prevent him from revealing what he might have learned." "Lies," Sir Henry shouted. "All lies. You have no evidence. On the contrary, I have the testimony of Shen Wu, the man who carried out your dirty work. He is currently under arrest and has given a full confession. Your schemes have come to an end, Sir Henry. The game is up." For a moment, Sir Henry seemed to deflate, the fight going out of him. Then his hand moved with sudden speed, drawing a revolver from his coat. "If I cannot have the cipher, then no one shall. Give it to me, Holmes, or I will shoot you where you stand." "I think not," a new voice said from the doorway. We all turned to see Major Geoffrey Ashworth standing there, his wounded arm in a sling but a revolver in his good hand, pointed steadily at his brother. "Geoffrey," Sir Henry gasped, "what are you doing here?" "Stopping you from committing yet another crime," Geoffrey replied, his voice heavy with sadness and anger. "Mr. Holmes sent me a telegram this afternoon warning me of what you had done. I could not believe it at first. My own brother, responsible for my disgrace, for the attempts on my life. But I knew Mr. Holmes would not make such accusations without proof. So I came here to see for myself, to hear the truth from your own lips, and now I have heard it." "Geoffrey, you don't understand," Sir Henry said desperately. "I did it for us, for our family. With the power the cipher would give me, I could restore our fortunes, achieve the position our father always dreamed of. You were meant to be an unfortunate casualty, but your sacrifice would not have been in vain. You destroyed my life," Geoffrey shouted, his hand trembling with emotion. "You let me be cashiered, disgraced, cast out from the only life I knew. And for what? For your own ambition, for your insane quest for power." "Put down the gun, Sir Henry," Holmes said quietly. "It is over. Come with us peacefully, and perhaps the courts will show mercy. Resist, and you will only make things worse for yourself." For a long moment, Sir Henry stood frozen, his revolver still pointed at Holmes. I could see the calculation in his eyes, the desperate search for some way out of the trap that had closed around him. Then, with a sudden movement, he turned the gun toward his brother. "If I cannot escape, then neither shall you," he cried, his finger tightening on the trigger. 3 shots rang out simultaneously, Geoffrey's, mine and Lestrade's. Sir Henry staggered backward, the revolver falling from his hand. He clutched at his chest, where 3 dark stains were spreading across his white shirt, then collapsed to the floor. I rushed to his side and examined him, but it was immediately clear that nothing could be done. The wounds were mortal, and he had only moments of life remaining. His eyes found mine and he tried to speak, but only blood came from his lips. Then his eyes glazed and he was gone. Geoffrey Ashworth stood staring down at his brother's body, the revolver hanging loosely from his hand. "I killed him," he whispered. "I killed my own brother." "We all fired, Major," Lestrade said gently. "Any one of our shots might have been the fatal one, and you were acting in defense of Mr. Holmes and in the performance of your duty. You are not a murderer, you are a soldier who has faced a terrible choice and made the right decision." Geoffrey looked at the inspector with haunted eyes, then slowly nodded. Holmes placed a hand on his shoulder in a rare gesture of sympathy, and I saw that even my friend, usually so cold and analytical, was moved by the tragedy of what had just occurred. The two ruffians who had accompanied Sir Henry had fled at the first sign of trouble, and we made no effort to pursue them. Instead, we summoned the local police and spent the remainder of the night providing statements and explanations. The servants of the household were bewildered and frightened, and it fell to me to explain, in general terms, what had occurred. By dawn, the immediate aftermath was dealt with. Sir Henry's body was removed by the local undertaker, pending an inquest. The Vermilion Cipher was secured in Lestrade's custody to be returned to the proper authorities in London. And Major Geoffrey Ashworth, vindicated at last but at terrible cost, was taken to a local inn to rest and recover from the shock of the evening's events. As Holmes, Lestrade, and I rode back to London in the grey morning light, none of us felt any sense of triumph. We had solved the case, recovered the cipher, and prevented it from falling into the wrong hands. But the price had been high: the death of Sir Henry, the destruction of a family, and the terrible knowledge that ambition and greed could drive a man to betray even his own flesh and blood. "A sad business," Lestrade said at last, breaking the long silence. "Indeed," Holmes agreed, "but a necessary one. Had Sir Henry succeeded in obtaining the key from Forsyth, had he assembled the complete Vermilion Cipher, the damage to British intelligence would have been incalculable. Hundreds of agents would have been exposed, operations compromised, lives lost. We had no choice but to act as we did." "What will happen now?" I asked. "The cipher and the key will be secured separately once more," Holmes replied. "New custodians will be appointed, new precautions taken. As for the Black Lotus, I expect that Shen Wu's testimony will lead to the arrest of many of its members here in London. The organization will be disrupted, though not destroyed. Such societies have deep roots and remarkable resilience, but at least for a time their operations will be curtailed. And Major Ashworth, he will be fully exonerated, his honor restored. The truth about the theft of the documents will be made known to the military authorities, though the full details regarding the Vermilion Cipher will remain classified. Geoffrey Ashworth will be able to hold his head high once more, though I fear the manner of his vindication will haunt him for the rest of his days." We reached London as the city was awakening to a new day. Holmes and I parted from Lestrade at Scotland Yard, where he would begin the process of officially closing the case, and returned to Baker Street. Mrs. Hudson greeted us with breakfast and expressions of relief that we had returned safely from our mysterious nocturnal expedition. As we sat in our familiar sitting room, eating our first meal in what seemed like days, I reflected on the extraordinary events of the past week. We had been drawn into a web of conspiracy that reached from the docks of Limehouse to the halls of Westminster, from the plains of India to the drawing rooms of Surrey. We had faced assassins, broken into houses, engaged in gun battles, and ultimately witnessed the death of a man driven to destruction by his own unbridled ambition. "Holmes," I said at last, "do you think Sir Henry truly believed he was acting for the good of his family?" Holmes considered the question carefully before responding. "I think he believed it at first, yes. But somewhere along the way, Watson, his purpose became corrupted. The pursuit of power for a noble end became the pursuit of power for its own sake. He convinced himself that the sacrifice of his brother's honor, the risk to British intelligence, even the possibility of selling secrets to hostile powers, all of it was justified by the position he would achieve. It is a common failing of ambitious men, this ability to rationalize any action, no matter how monstrous, in service of what they perceive as a higher purpose. A cautionary tale, I observed. Indeed, and one that bears remembering. The Vermilion Cipher was created to protect British interests, but in the wrong hands, it would have become a tool of oppression and betrayal. Information is power, Watson, and power corrupts, unless checked by conscience and accountability. Sir Henry had neither. We finished our breakfast in contemplative silence, then Holmes retired to his bedroom to rest. I remained in the sitting room making notes on the case for my records. As I wrote, I found myself thinking about Major Geoffrey Ashworth, a man whose life had been destroyed by forces beyond his control, who had endured 2 years of disgrace with dignity, and who had finally achieved vindication only to discover that his own brother was responsible for his suffering. I hoped that he would find peace in time, though I feared the scars would never fully heal. End of part 1. Dear readers, what a tangled web of deceit and conspiracy we have uncovered. The affair of the Vermilion Cipher has revealed the depths to which ambition can drive a man, and the terrible consequences when family loyalty is corrupted by greed and hunger for power. But wait, though Sir Henry Ashworth lies dead and the Vermilion Cipher has been recovered, is the matter truly concluded? Lieutenant Colonel Forsyth still possesses the key, and there are questions yet unanswered. What became of Lei Chen, the mysterious silk merchant who infiltrated Major Ashworth's quarters in Bengal? Is the Black Lotus truly defeated, or do they yet pose a threat? And what secrets might the Vermilion Cipher itself contain, secrets that even Sherlock Holmes has not yet discovered? Join us for part 2 of the affair of the Vermilion Cipher, where new dangers emerge, old enemies return, and the final pieces of this elaborate puzzle fall into place. The game is far from over, dear readers, and the most shocking revelations are yet to come. If you have enjoyed this tale, please like and subscribe for the thrilling conclusion.